Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to, I guess this is the first ever Holistic Justice Challenge. It's a pretty cool thing I think we're doing here. Some time ago, I received a phone call from David Register with Bard College. And if you know anything about David, he does a lot of work with debating in the prison system, educational debating in the prison system. And he calls and he says, I've got this guy, John Gannon, who I think you're going to have some overlapping interests with, and we should get you in touch with him. And so I say, okay, where's this guy at? And he's like, oh, in Pismo. And I was like, oh, easy. And so get in touch with Dr. Gannon, and we start chatting about debate and prison debating and the criminal justice system and all sorts of things. And it becomes clear that what John is interested in is an opportunity to have young people be thinking about the way that the criminal justice system impacts not just the lives of the people that we're always thinking about when we think about the criminal justice system: prisoners, lawyers, police, judges, prison administrators, and so on and so on. So many people that are directly involved with the criminal justice system, but also wants young people to be thinking about the wider scope of the lives that are touched by the effects of our criminal justice system. And this sort of dovetails with my interest of having debates or argumentative scenarios in which people are able to escape the mind virus that has seized upon the American public. And no, we're not necessarily talking about the woke mind virus that you've heard so much about lately. We're talking about the competitive mind virus that all Americans share regardless of political affiliation. A problem that we have in our country today is that we don't listen to each other in order to learn from one another and build upon each other's ideas and see what's valuable across the political spectrum. We listen to each other to try to figure out how to defeat one another. And in doing that, we cut ourselves off from opportunities for change that could meet everybody's needs. And so this exercise that we are engaged in today is an exercise in which we are going to argue with each other. We're going to present arguments about who we should prioritize to think about when we're thinking about the effects of the criminal justice system on secondary, tertiary stakeholders and the like. And we're not going to listen to each other to determine what's wrong with what our opponents have said, but we're going to listen to each other to determine what's right with what they have said and how we might be able to collaborate with their ideas, intermingling them with our own to create stronger ways of making sense of who's affected by the criminal justice system, how they're affected by the criminal justice system, what's not so good about that, and how we might be able to improve the conditions for everyone who's touched by the system. This is not a traditional approach to intercollegiate debating. This is a very non-traditional approach to intercollegiate debating. The hope here is that if we can get small groups of young people thinking about argumentation and advocacy in these ways, in addition to traditional competitive debating, that they'll have two skill sets at hand. One that allows them to defeat bad ideas, and another that allows them to adopt and elevate good ideas and work together with people with whom they might not naturally share a tremendous amount of agreement, but might share some agreement to, in essence, help young people who are studying how to create arguments about policies and people that are affected by policies figure out how to collaborate, even in a space where collaboration may seem difficult or even unnatural. Our hope is that this is going to be a multi-year event. We hope that each subsequent year is going to build upon what was produced in the last year. Our partners at the Global Justice Resource Center are essentially using our work here to inform the way that they are thinking about stakeholding groups, arguments, advocacy. We're kind of like a mini think tank of college students to help support their mission. And so we're very grateful for their partnership. And I'm sure, as John will tell us in a second here, they're very grateful for ours. Dr. John Gannon is, I've had a wonderful time getting to know this man. He completed undergraduate degrees in philosophy and psychology, and he holds a master's degree in both disciplines, as well as a PhD in clinical psychology from Florida State University. Dr. Gannon is an author, he's a direct service provider, a forensic clinical and correctional psychologist, a direct service provider to correctional populations, and a consultant in many places around the world. He's been a staff psychologist in forensic mental hospitals for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the California Men's Colony just down the road, where he served as chief of the medical staff. More recently, Dr. Gannon has served as a consultant for prison program development in places as diverse as Malawi to Singapore. So Dr. Gannon is the executive director of the Global Justice Resource Center, and he is a wonderful partner that has really gone out of his way to make sure that this event could happen. And so I'll hand this microphone over to you, John. Let's clip this on you. And we'll give you the floor.
Thank you. This is so exciting. Is the mic all right?
Yep.
All right. It's very exciting. Thank you for the kind introduction. I wrote it myself, so I thought it came out well. It's a pleasure to welcome everyone to the Holistic Justice Challenge on behalf of the Global Justice Resource Center, along with my Nigerian friend. Has Uju been able to log on?
She's here.
All right, excellent. The Global Justice Resource Center is a nonpartisan digital and real-world platform for connecting individuals and community organizations with us and with each other. Our goal is to identify useful social and justice, I'm getting signals that people can't hear me.
You're getting signals.
Can you hear me? Can people hear me all right? Okay. All right, thank you.
You may want to put the mic down.
Ooh, careful now. So our goal is to identify useful social and justice innovations that can be funded, supported, and scaled up to improve citizens' experienced sense of justice and contribute to the well-being of the communities. Our mission is to use our network to stimulate ideas and bring expertise and funding to people and groups who are already demonstrating creativity and goal attainment, and whose concepts and projects can be expanded to improve justice and well-being in the communities. As an example of the kind of innovation that we've been looking for, we want to support, there's a program called Lights On in Minnesota. And I think it's just a fantastic program. The Lights On group provides funding to police officers who then, when they stop people that have taillights out or some other necessary repair, they give them a voucher to get it repaired instead of giving them a ticket. And so that nurtures the relationship between the police and the community. It helps struggling citizen, who is the person that's most likely to have an unrepaired taillight, but somebody that's already having problems. And it also improves automobile safety in the community. So these are the kinds of things that we should be looking for. What John alluded to in taking the voices of the typically unheard and considering how we can collaborate with those to create new and innovative ideas that improve the community. Criminal justice is a part of the community, and our theory is that criminal justice problems arise in the community and they need to be solved by the community. And that's where the real satisfaction comes in, is when the community takes responsibility for itself and helps to contribute along with the authority figures that are in the community. So our approach is forward-looking in perspective, positive in orientation, and collaborative in method. Today's event is an example of our own support for innovation and bringing issues of justice and civic engagement to younger people and students throughout through their interest in academic debate. I'm deeply and sincerely grateful for this opportunity. In particular, I want to thank Dr. John Patrick for organizing the event. Dr. Patrick has been a huge supporter of the project and a major contributor to the concepts behind it. He's been a pleasure to work with. I also want to thank Cal Poly for providing this excellent venue, the teams, you guys, you made it happen, the judges, Robert Reyes, Chief Probation Officer, and our judge, one of our judges today, Star Graber. Star is leader of the County Drug and Alcohol Services, the coaches for all of their preparation, willingness to participate. And I have a designated community member, Peter Keith, former mayor of Grover Beach. I'm going to ask him for his comments while the judges are deliberating. So we'll see what Peter thinks about this whole process. And of course, everyone else will be invited to share some ideas as well. So I want to thank especially our keynote speaker, who's come all the way from Florida to share his insights on corrections and criminal justice issues, my friend and collaborator, General Mark Inch. But I first want to welcome by Zoom from Nigeria, Dr. Uju Agomo. Dr. Agomo is a veteran activist, justice sector reform advocate, and she serves as president of our organization.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. John Gannon. Thank you, Patrick. And indeed, I'm very excited at what is happening over there. It's also important to let you know that people are also connected and watching across the globe. I'm also very happy that the Vice Chancellor and indeed staff and students of the Chrisland University in Nigeria are also watching. So I welcome you on behalf of the Global Justice Resource Center to this very important innovation. It is holistic, as had been earlier mentioned, but also it gives us opportunity to see how the community can actually be involved in what we do within the justice space. More importantly, it's going to give us opportunity to have the young mind, those who are going to drive the new generation of our justice sector, to be able, right at the beginning of their academic career, to begin to interrogate issues around this, to begin to question what works and what does not work, to begin to understand why what works actually works and why what doesn't work does not work. But more importantly, to begin to articulate solutions that can be sustainable, solutions that can be impactful, solutions that can also be shared and adopted across the globe. There's a whole lot we can learn. And actually, one of the intriguing part of what we're about to do is actually the approach. We always think debate is only about, come, let me win you over. So we are constantly, as have been told to us, not listening, but constantly thinking about what next point to make to defeat your opponent. But this creative methodology being adopted here is actually looking at what are those good aspects of the other person's argument. How can I add value to those aspects? But how can we all incrementally, collaboratively make a difference? And I think that's the unique thing about it. I'm really very excited, and I'm going to listen very intently to the debates. But I also want to let you know that this is something that we will be very willing to see happen in different continents of the world. Certainly in Africa, as you know, you already have those who are keenly interested in this and also listening to it, which is the Vice Chancellor and indeed the staff and students of the Chrisland University, Abeokuta, Ogun State, Nigeria. And they are really looking forward to replicating what they are going to observe today. One more time, I welcome you and thank you. And Global Justice Resource Center is very happy to partner with you and to be part of this. Thank you again, and thank you.
Thank you, Uju. Thank you. We're honored to a huge degree in welcoming Major General Mark S. Inch, retired now, as keynote speaker for our event. General Inch is the former Provost Marshal General and Senior Military Police Officer of the U.S. Army, to include commanding general of all felony-level investigators and oversight of all domestic and overseas U.S. Army correctional facilities. Subsequently, he served as the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and recently retired as secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections. General Inch holds a BA in an area dear to my heart, biblical archaeology, an MA in geography with a Middle East and Africa focus. So this is, I'm sure, of special interest to General Inch, and various upper-level Army college degrees. He received the American Correctional Association's Walter Dunbar Accreditation Achievement and the ACA's highest honor, the E.R. Cass Award. General Inch will share his deep insights from a career managing complex systems, challenging the participants to see their individual potential to address the challenges and opportunities for criminal justice. General Inch.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. We have randomized the order of the teams and selected an order. Our first team speaking will be from MSU Denver. I would like to welcome the students to the lectern. They have the floor.
Okay. Greetings, my name is Davina Rath, and I, along with my teammates, Albany and Kristen, will be representing Metropolitan State University of Denver at the 2023 Holistic Justice Challenge. Thank you to Cal Poly San Obispo, the Global Justice Resource Center, and our distinguished panel for making this event possible. We are so excited to be here and look forward to this and our next round of competition, where we get to consider the excellent ideas brought up by the other institutions here. For purposes of this presentation, our plan is to make the case for prioritizing two stakeholder groups that are often not given significant attention in the discourses surrounding our criminal justice system: employers and children of the incarcerated. I will begin by discussing the need to fully include employers in developing prison-to-work pipelines that must enhance the chances of previously incarcerated individuals to avoid recidivism and build a post-prison life. Albany will then provide an in-depth analysis of children of the incarcerated as an often forgotten and very much at-risk stakeholder group. Kristen will then conclude by providing some closing remarks, connecting our analysis of both stakeholder groups. Fundamentally, our goal is to express why we believe employers and children are the most important stakeholder groups in this discourse, but most importantly, why we must address them in tandem in order to build a more just world for the incarcerated, their socioeconomic environments, their communities, and their families. Finally, we will conclude with thoughts from our panel. Now, let's turn to our first stakeholder group, employers. I would like to start by quickly telling you the story of Christopher Williams. Christopher Williams was released from prison in 2019, right before the peak of the pandemic. He was a line cook, but unfortunately got injured on the job and had to find another place of employment that was less physically intense. He struggled to find a job on the grounds of his criminal record. In an interview done by Justin Stabley with PBS NewsHour, he said that it had been one closed door after another. Christopher Williams is not alone. He is just one example of a much larger issue, or a much larger problem with implications not only for the incarcerated and previously incarcerated, but also for those employers currently seeking workers in the post-pandemic economy. In fact, the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2021 reported that over 2/3 of people who have been incarcerated reoffend and get rearrested, and 60% of formerly incarcerated individuals struggle with unemployment. Furthermore, the Center of Economy and Policy states the U.S. economy loses in between $57 and $65 billion annually due to unemployment. For ex-prisoners, it is very difficult to re-enter the workforce. This leads to higher state and federal government assistance payouts, loss of income tax revenue, and drains the amount of monetary investment that can go into essential welfare programs. It is important to add employers to the dialogue when pertaining to criminal justice, because not only will it bolster the economy, but by hiring individuals with criminal records, we can reduce the chance of recidivism. This will ultimately benefit their families. Indeed, children of the incarcerated are directly impacted by the economic and financial strains of their parents. Research also suggests that such strain can impact the health and well-being of children well into their later life. For instance, Federico Triolo and colleagues from the University of Stockholm reported that childhood financial strain is associated with old age depression. This is just one among many issues children of the incarcerated would face if their parents are unable to secure steady employment and build safe spaces for them to grow, learn, and develop. To conclude my part of the speech, I would like to bring back an idea mentioned by our keynote speaker, Mark Inch. He suggested that it would be a good idea to have jobs lined up for prisoners before their release date to give them a plan and something to fall back on after they're released. This is a fantastic idea of a positive policy we can enact which lines with our argument. I am now happy to welcome my teammate Albany to elaborate on our second stakeholder group, children.
Okay, so as Davina has mentioned, children are directly impacted by employment situations of parents or their guardians. For this reason, among others, we believe that they should be prioritized in our criminal justice discourse. According to an article by Nancy P. Carrera of Texas Children's Hospital and colleagues in 2021, an estimated 5 million children were in the United States have or experienced parental incarceration, which is an increase from 2007, which was 2 to 4 million children, according to Susan Phillips and Patricia O'Brien. While incarceration affects many children, it disproportionately affects children of color, mainly those in Black and Latino populations. And according to Carrera and colleagues, that within this population, 1 in 9 children have or will be affected by incarceration, parental incarceration within those populations. And this shows that consequences disproportionately affect individuals of color, not only with their jobs, but the economic prospects and the future, which, as Davina has mentioned, will affect children. Experiencing parental incarceration can lead to a number of challenges within children, which include mental health. According to Carrera and colleagues, this can lead to emotional and behavioral impacts, delinquency, and addictions. And then Joseph Murray of the University of Cambridge and Lynn Murray of the University of Reading also stated that it can affect their family situations, communication about parental absence, and restricted contact with their incarcerated parent. They also mentioned that it could lead to reduced supervision and economic strain. One way we can fix this is by having support systems, which may include counseling for children that have incarcerated families, even more video conferencing with parents so that they can build on their attachment styles with that parent, and just more visiting hours. And I think that will definitely help prevent some of these outcomes from happening. But now our final teammate, Kristen, will forge connections between our two stakeholder groups.
Now that my teammates have covered in depth these two stakeholder groups, I will bridge the gap between both and explain why we believe these groups belong in this conversation together. Families, specifically children, are deeply impacted by the financial implications of the criminal justice system. When someone loses their job due to incarceration, families often lose an income stream. There's also an increased financial strain due to the fact that there are often unexpected costs associated with incarceration. This means that families often have to choose which bills to pay. This might also mean that families lose their homes and can sometimes even lose their children to Child Protective Services, according to the Financial Health Network in 2021. Entering a child into the foster care system has incredibly damaging impacts on a child's mental health, as cited by the United Health Foundation. And as my teammate has already discussed, children are already incredibly deeply impacted by losing a parent to incarceration. Once a family is incarcerated, 65% of families report being unable to pay for basic needs such as food as a result of their family member being incarcerated. This statistic is from an article published by Alana Samuels in The Atlantic in 2015. Food insecurity, again, results in a negative psychological impact, such as those my teammates have already discussed. Before I conclude, I want us to take a moment to appreciate the implications of the statistics and facts discussed in this presentation. It is difficult for most of us to imagine what it is like to not know when your next meal will come or if you will even have a home, let alone going through these things as a child. These are the realities faced by families economically impacted by losing employment opportunities from incarceration. It is for these basic humanitarian reasons these stakeholders must be involved in this discourse. As Mark Inch mentioned during his presentation today, part of the justice system is aimed at retribution, but that retribution should not extend to innocent parties. In this presentation, we have argued for prioritizing employers and the children of the incarcerated as key stakeholders in the criminal justice system. Both groups are often ignored when framing solutions to the consequences of incarceration and finding ways to promote effective pathways from prison to life outside of prison.
Thank you for your comments. The judges now have 6 minutes to pose questions to the debaters. I will start that time when the first judge asks their question.
So in your research, were you able to see any examples of family services to the children of the incarcerated that could be modeled?
Within my research, most of them were just like programs that like incarcerated parents have, like some of them that I've named that they wish were within the system. So like having more time with their children, whether that be video conferencing or times, or just counseling for either both of them together to kind of work through that, or just for the child themselves. But that's pretty much like what I found.
So I guess I'd have then the same questions of examples of programs that would bring employers in contact with the incarcerated population prior to release. Were you able to see any model programs?
So in my research, I didn't really find too many overlap between employers actually hiring people with criminal records. In fact, in like the example that I referenced, Christopher Williams, he had a job, but he only got that job after he was done, and it was because they didn't do any like criminal background checks. And most jobs with a livable kind of like salary, they always do background checks. So there's really no overlap between in the sense that like there's not many policies that allow people with criminal records to have a job with a salary that can really support their families. Does that answer your question?
It does, but as a follow-on to it then is the aspect of, with the example you're given of the individual, is there any policy recommendations that are kind of in consideration that address how to mask prison records during at least the early parts of an interview process?
Yeah, I also don't know if this
It's on, but it is not on. The battery has died. You are going to have to shout. You're debaters, you can project.
I think that would be a great thing to implement. I, in my research, didn't find anything like that, like masking criminal records. Not to say that doesn't exist, but that's just not something in my research that I found. But I do think that that's a really great idea to kind of like, maybe for specifically non-violent crimes or felonies or whatever. I don't really know how you put the limitations on that, but in my research, I didn't find anything like that. I think that a program like that is a brilliant idea, though.
So perhaps just a little bit of clarity for me in listening to your argument. From your research, is it the impact of the incarceration that leads to economic instability of the children of those incarcerated, or is it the issue of barriers due to their criminal record? So is it one or the other, or how would you sort of present that?
Honestly, I would probably say that it could be both.
Okay.
I mean, because like if you have one parent that's not able to work, that may like kind of limit their abilities to, like, as you can imagine, like do things or just, I don't want to say succeed, but like just be a child, I guess. It could be stressful, and like Davina said, that has a lot of mental strain on them as they get older. But I also think there is, and as I found, there's like a huge stigma surrounding having a parent of a parent that is incarcerated. So I feel like it's definitely kind of a mixture, but if any of you.
Yeah, I think we're definitely looking at this in terms of these two stakeholder groups having synergy with each other, in terms of obviously not being able to hire people with criminal records affects our unemployment statistics, which then turns around and affects our economy as a whole. And kind of with that, if a parent can't be employed, it negatively impacts the child or a family unit in terms of loss of income, having to pay extra fees. Oftentimes when people go through the criminal justice system, they have to deal with things like paying legal fees. And it kind of just all around negatively impacts both groups. And that's why we came up with the idea to present them together.
Understood. And then I guess my follow-up to that would be, through your research, did you identify anywhere where there is a intentional effort to try to employ formerly incarcerated individuals?
Yeah, I don't really know of any policies off the top of my head that do, but that's not to say that there is none. I'm sure there is, but I mean, in a state like California, that's definitely more, a lot more like blue state, I would say. I'm sure that there's something like that, and just making that kind of like widespread, just so that everyone has this kind of like same opportunities. Like I said, I'm sure these policies exist. It's just not something that I found in my research. And even though they do exist, I think that we should implement more of them.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. We would like to welcome the next team on the list, which I believe was Rachel Strohacker and Sophie Albini.
Are the judges ready? According to the Office of Justice Programs, in 2016, over 3 million children have parents who are incarcerated. That's 1 in 10 children in California alone. That means if you've ever seen a playground, you've seen a child who has an incarcerated parent, a child whose future is impacted through no fault of their own. We're going to call this the playground problem. Children who have parents that are incarcerated experience 5 times more ACEs than children without. An ACE is an adverse child experience, a trauma that brings lasting health deficits into adulthood and greatly increases incarceration rates. For the sake of our presentation, we are going to use incarcerated children as our example, but the support systems that we argue for are crucial to children facing all kinds of trauma. Today, you will hear numerous arguments for crucial stakeholders in the criminal justice system.
We don't seek to mitigate their importance, but we stand to argue that systems that prioritize children are the most important. Children and childhood experiences shape adult opportunities and actions. To change the criminal justice system, we must break cycles that leave impoverished and underprivileged children from entering the criminal justice system. Therefore, we will argue that classrooms and after-school programs must be a larger part of the discussion on incarceration reform, because these systems impact and are impacted by criminal justice.
Let's bring our attention to a real child who was affected by parental incarceration. When she was 3 years old, Sonia's mother was arrested and her dad was in and out of prison. When she was 10 years old, she actually saw him being arrested in her home. While she was fortunate enough to live with her grandparents and at a friend's house, she lacked stability in her home life, and she was not able to get adequate support through a third space or through her school system. The issues with Sonia's care began in her classroom. There's often a lack of awareness towards students facing parental incarceration. In a study done by Plymouth University, they found that in a high-risk community, almost none of the teachers could answer the question of whether they had students whose parents were incarcerated. Without this awareness, teachers have no way to support the unique struggles of their students and create a much needed safe space away from the instability of their home lives. They're also unable to be sensitive in the topics they discuss. For example, if they use lessons about crime that talk with good and bad labels, it can be extremely isolating to students whose parents might be on the bad side. It is also crucial to understand children's situations to have an appropriate response to their behavioral issues. According to a behavioral psychologist, Giante Owens, when behavioral issues are not properly addressed in early education, they lead to much more severe issues in adulthood. Sonia herself started acting out at elementary and middle school because of what was happening in her home. When school systems do not act with care and compassion and instead go to punitive punishment, it can lead children to enter the juvenile incarceration system simply from things that happened in school. We need to make sure that classrooms are a support to students instead of actively working against them. We need to make teachers aware of student situations and make sure that they are not bringing bias into the way that they interact with students, because this can lower their academic performance, behavioral expectations, and eventually end with these students being incarcerated themselves. The classroom is a crucial stakeholder in the criminal justice system because it needs to be a part of the active solution to mitigating the damage that trauma has on children so they do not end going to crime in their future.
As the sun sets on a school day, many children head home to empty houses. According to the After School Alliance, 19.4 million children are unsupervised after school. That's a third of a playground. In California alone, juvenile crime peaks from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. right after school. That's why our second stakeholder today is after-school programs, because they provide children with a safe third space and positive mentorship. Third spaces are places that are not your home and not the place that you work, or in a child's case, not school. These are places where you're able to grow a sense of community and explore new interests. However, they have begun to die in the US. It is becoming less and less common for anyone, let alone kids, to have a place for them to meet new people and try new things. After-school programs act as a third space, providing these kids with these new experiences. Children also gain positive mentorship from after-school programs. Adults act as mentors, supervising kids in various activities. According to the National League of Cities, mentorship has shown to decrease juvenile delinquency. Additionally, mentoring programs results in a high retention in schools across all demographics. It is especially crucial for a child with an incarcerated parent to have another adult in their life pushing them towards positive decisions. Children need positive role models in their life beyond their parents. After-school programs provide them with that opportunity. Now, despite the overwhelming evidence that after-school programs reduce crime and improve outcomes for kids, they are still not given the attention and resources that they deserve. Lack of funding is the #1 limiter for after-school programs. The RAND Corporation estimates that for every dollar invested in after-school programs, it yields $9 in long-term benefits like reduced crime, improved academic performance, and increased earning potential. That means for every dollar not invested in after-school programs, we spend 9 more on prisons.
Let's bring our attention back to Sonia. A Spanish teacher gave her a book that talked about guilt and dealing with her emotions. And she said that this simple act of mentorship changed the way that she viewed the world. She was able to be extremely successful in high school after this event, graduating valedictorian of her class and student council president. Sonia's story is not one of a kind. Rather, it is emblematic of the small ways we can help children and the support systems that are needed to make them successful. If this tiny support was able to change Sonia's life, imagine what systematic change could do. Sonia is only one child on the playgrounds across America. And today we use parental incarceration as an example of trauma, but there are numerous other traumatic experiences that children have in their early childhood that can lead them to a future life in crime. Youth experiences shape adult futures, and so it's crucial that we focus on reforming classrooms and positive after-school programs so that children are not only able to stay on the playground, but are able to watch their own children on the playground instead of hearing about it from behind bars.
Thank you.
Thank you. There'll be 6 minutes for questioning.
So can I push a little bit on the RAND study where it said every dollar invested in after-school programs? I thought I heard you say that it resulted in $9 of benefit, either in tax and all that. But then you switched it around and said it meant $9 used for incarceration as the opposite. How does that actually work?
Yeah, so the study by the RAND Corporation itself said that in long-term benefits, we reaped $9 in return. And those benefits were reduced crime, improved academic performance for the child, and then increased earning potential. All of those things help the child stay out of the prison system. So by retroactively not investing that dollar into after-school programs, you're taking $9 away from these potentials.
So if immediately incarcerated, therefore, not that this $9 would not be realized.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more? Do you have any sense of what ages would be most appropriate for the after-school programs?
After-school programs impact all kids of all ages. I know for myself, a lot of after-school programs throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school were able to steer me towards going to Cal Poly and being an aerospace engineering major. After-school programs were what gave me an opportunity to explore these new interests in a safe format for me. And I know a lot of the studies that I found, especially from the After School Alliance, which is an NGO focused on promoting after-school programs, talks a lot about how when you start early with elementary school after-school programs, it only helps increase the possible benefits as that child gets older. And as Sophie mentioned, whenever you impact a child, it impacts their adulthood.
Did you find any critical stage in which delinquency at school became an issue, and any correlation then as it relates to the incarceration?
Yeah, so there's actually a social phenomenon. I'm sure you've heard of the school to prison pipeline. And this is where, and this usually starts around middle and most particularly high school. So as I discussed, these behavioral issues will start in young ages, but we're not going to be bringing cops onto campus in an elementary school place. We're not going to be sending kids and charging them with criminal offenses when they're that young. It's just when this behavioral continues into middle and especially high school, when we actually have cops on school campuses, we see a drastic increase in things that would normally be a suspension turning into an actual criminal charge. So we actually saw this happen on my own local high school. I had a good friend who had a pocket knife in school. He was an agriculture student and he was using it in his after school program, and it fell out during class. We had a police officer that saw it and actually tried to press charges on him for carrying a pocket knife, which I'll tell you, if you went into any of our agriculture classrooms, you would have found a lot of those. And so it's criminalizing these offenses that happen in school, that have kids enter the criminal justice system. And I'm sure, as you are all aware, once you enter that system, it's really hard to leave.
Spin one last, do we got a second there? Is so the aspect of the teacher awareness, so you're making recommendations, for example, in academic and certification programs as it relates to preparation of teachers?
Yeah, so it's actually a really complex issue, because they found that if you tell teachers that students' parents are incarcerated, like one of the studies that I referenced, teachers will actually carry a bias into the classroom. So when given blind behavioral reports of children and told either their father was out of the picture versus their father was incarcerated, there was massively more behavioral issues spotted by the teacher if their parent was incarcerated. And so when we're doing these awareness programs, what the San Francisco School District found when they implemented a program such as this is that they also need to put in sensitivity trainings. And so both within the San Francisco School District was the first to really create this program where they do sensitivity trainings and also bring forth awareness. And then it's actually being a piloted program within my own school district. I'm from Elk Grove, and we're one of the largest school districts. We don't have a super high incarceration rate, but we still have students whose parents are incarcerated. And so these programs are a combination of awareness and sensitivity.
Now, in your study of the San Francisco School District, was there any correlation between this program and reduced rates of youth entering the juvenile justice system?
Yes. So while they don't know the full effects, because this program was only implemented, I believe, 4 years ago, so we're not going to see all of the effects quite yet. They did find a reduction in students being sent to it was really focused on high school students, and it was focused on being sent to the cops for something that would rather be a suspension or something that should be handled in school. Because that was something that really broke out in California a few years ago, was that there was a specific incident that became really popular where a student actually in my home school district was arrested for something that really they shouldn't have been arrested for, and that opened the conversation. And so that was really what this was focused on. And they have seen a reduction, though official numbers aren't really out because it's been such a short time.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm clear, that the reduction that they saw was referrals to a police officer.
Yes, and it was also, it was general behavioral, and then what they're actually quantifying, because it's what the study's focused on, is the referrals to police officers.
Thank you.
And that's time. Thank you so much. And next on our list is Alexis Barksdale and Kelly Wilkes from Cal Poly.
And I'm not even AV, so I'm glad this works. Yes. So before we get started, we'd like to offer the judges and everybody else competing, we have a source list if you guys would like some references. My partner can go ahead and hand those to anybody that raises their hand. And I'd also like to make a disclaimer that I will be sitting for the duration of the speech due to circumstance. I hope that's okay with everybody. Here's. So to introduce ourselves as well, my name is Alexis Barksdale.
And I'm Kelly Wilkes.
And we're representing Cal Poly today. June 2019, in the affluent city of Walnut Creek, a young Black disabled man named Miles Hall was viewed as a threat. Despite years of proactive work to protect her son,
His mother could not stop the tragedy that unfolded that day. Officers fatally shot Miles Hall within minutes of arriving on scene. What happened to Miles is unfortunately part of a long-established and troubling trend. Nearly 1 in 4 people killed by police lives with a serious mental illness.
Mental illness is not a crime, yet in the case of Miles Hall and many others facing disabilities, an outdated understanding of disability has led to one of the largest communities to be the most vulnerable to police stereotyping. Disability is one of the most fluid forms of identity, as it can potentially happen to anyone at any time. Disability encompasses both invisible and visible disabilities, including mental health, and can affect anyone, individuals intermittently. Recently, our generation has been leading this cause for new understanding of disability. And we want to open up the conversation about how this new framework reveals this community as a relevant stakeholder in our prison system. Today, we will tell you why we don't need tragedy to create change and show that disappearing people does not disappear problems. By disappearing, we are addressing the continuation of an outdated cycle of shoving both disabled and homeless communities into the corners of society.
Thinking about how social services can serve to uplift our most vulnerable communities within the criminal justice system, it is important to understand what is currently happening within our prisons. We plan on highlighting 2 important stakeholders, both those within the disabled community as well as the homeless population, which we plan to explain are interconnected. We also plan to elaborate on how we can reduce recidivism by adopting reform with the help of those directly affected, to best combat the current problem within our prison system. Issues with services and subsequent accommodations not being provided to inmates reflect the need for the Clark Remedial Plan, which was enacted to push against the system not providing quality care for all prisoners. The goal of this remedial plan and countless others is simply to protect qualified individuals with disabilities from discrimination and guarantees equal access of opportunities and provision of accommodations. The only issue with this and other programs instilled during this time is the rhetoric and the use of outdated terminology and procedures that should be updated. The Clark Remedial Plan was originally put into effect in 2001, and to best reform, we need to see these policies re-examined and expanded upon with the help of those within our community. Considering a Clark Remedial Plan is definitely not the only time a prisoner has been forced to sue for not being granted adequate care, Armstrong Remedial Plan and many others also push for equality within the prison system. Armstrong Remedial Plan also came to fruition in 2001 and was last revised under federal court order in September 2007. During the revision, impairment was redefined under ADA as a disability only if it limits 1 or more major life activities. These revisions and others were necessary to expand the impact that this program was meant to have on the quality of life for all prisoners. More recently, in March 2021, Judge Wilkin issued 2 orders intended to stop officers within the corrections and rehabilitation from abusing and discriminating against people with disabilities. Seeing as how we are constantly amending these plans, it is important that we are listening to those who are directly impacted by these policies during the reform process. While these communities come with their complexities, they deserve to be handled on a case-to-case basis and not treated as solely a criminal going through the system. These are human beings with multiple identities and various circumstances leading to imprisonment that need to be not only considered, but accommodated. Thinking about the disabled and homeless as often being interrelated is key to understanding the threats that they face. Societies have silenced both those within the disabled community and the homeless population. Those 2 compounded creates one of the most vulnerable communities within our prison system. The Center for Justice and Social Compassion estimates that 45% of all people experiencing homelessness are disabled or diagnosed with a mental illness, meaning should you become disabled, the eventuality that you become homeless is exponentially more likely.
United we stand, divided we fall is a famous tagline of the U.S. military. Messages like this have allowed the U.S. military the ability to offer opportunities for a better future for low-income households, a chance for young, hardworking Americans to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. As seen in many of our veterans, disability is the price for bravery, with more than half of the homeless veteran population in the U.S. having a disability. So what happens to our soldiers? Not only is the promise of the American dream torn away from them, but a new mantra is revealed as our discharged vets find themselves on the streets. As in California alone, we have the highest rate of unsheltered vets at 70%. Able-bodied we stand, disabled we fall. By reframing the view we have of disability and its connection to homelessness, we can see how the current definition of disability abandons these vulnerable communities while forcing them into a stereotype threat. This outdated view of disability enabled officers to interpret Miles as violent rather than a person with a distinct identity. He was a person, not a criminal. When we continue to criminalize and disappear these behaviors, compounded with the negative associations of those who are houseless, we see people falling into recidivism.
Taking into account the complexities of these two stakeholders, we hope to elaborate the connection between those who are faced with homelessness and disabilities. We want to refocus the real issue plaguing our criminal justice system, and that is recidivism or reincarceration. When we criminalize behaviors, we see mental illness and disabilities being criminalized and people falling into an uncontrollable cycle of recidivism. More than 2/3 of people released from prisons will be rearrested within the first 3 years of release, and 83% will be returned to the criminal justice system within 9 years. Though this is an issue that plagues all prisoners, according to a study by the Journal of American Academy of Psychiatry and Law, found that inmates with both mental illness and substance use disorder recidivate at an even higher rate. The matter is complex, and the effort to disentangle mental illness, substance abuse, and other criminological factors in relationship to crime is nothing new. That is why we are here today to not debate the probability of whether or not a criminal is more or less likely to commit a crime. We are here to explain how recidivism disproportionately affects those with mental illness and how we can further be amplified when substance abuse is not appropriately treated.
We would also like to reiterate the possibility of disability affecting anyone at any point, whether it be visible, invisible, or intermittent. Understanding the fundamental need to differentiate care case by case is important to ensuring each individual is recognized fully as a citizen before they are convicted of being a criminal as a way to reduce recidivism. Redefining how we view criminals and instead humanizing one another allows us to better help where necessary instead of our current system of neglect.
We don't need to experience these tragedies to force change. Instead, we should be more receptive to the needs of those within the disabled community as well as the growing homeless population, those directly affected by these injustices. Thank you.
Thank you. The judges have 6 minutes to question.
So in your study of the homeless, did I miss some of the statistics of what percent of the homeless were seriously had SMI?
We did mention, I want to say it's, we got a lot of statistics. Give me 1 second.
Maybe take from a different angle. As you research the homeless population of those who, were recently incarcerated, was there a crime category that seemed to predominate those that, were not able to find homes that seemed to be pushed into a homeless situation?
I think what we were finding was just when disabilities weren't accounted for within the prison system, especially mental health related disabilities, we are seeing a surge of substance use disorders being highlighted as more of the issue than the mental health related issues. And so I think just treating them case by case was the solution to having more differentiation between like the care that we're providing for each prisoner. So that way, when they do end up being released, they have the preliminary care that they need in order to have a better chance when they are released. That means like having proper medication, having resources given,
and especially in consideration to the way that we're viewing disability within prisons, making sure that those accommodations are met within the prison system is definitely a key to making sure that they don't end up on the streets.
And so taking that further, when they do re-enter into the community, were there some best practices about that?
We were thinking about probable solutions with, I think mentioned by our keynote speaker, having housing set up prior to being released is a big issue that prisoners face when being released, not having a safe place to go and falling back into these tendencies when their mental health disorders are not treated. They have no concrete plan for how to maintain the same regimen that they have within the prison system. So I think that that's definitely a key aspect is securing housing, because we were finding that the statistics reflected people with disabilities end up on the streets because of a lack of resources. And when those resources are provided, they have a lot better chance of having a good quality of life after they re-enter.
So in your research, how'd you wrestle with this idea that of freedom of choice?
We understand that some prisoners probably while undiagnosed need to be evaluated for mental health disorders, and I think so often substance use disorder isn't considered a disability, and so understanding the correlation between not having quality of care and then getting these diagnoses that could end up adding to the quality of care for prisoners, we definitely feel like there should be a screening process for prisoners that feel the need, that if they need to go through a screening process, they're able to choose whether or not that is an option for them. I think the majority would want to be screened, especially if it would help with their quality of care. So
I would also like to add with one of our goals of universalizing this new idea of how to look at disability. I think it could help with these screenings because it also allows you this, if this definition of disability is universalized, to self-identify as disabled. So I think it could help a lot of prisoners choose to join these, do these extra screenings, as well as if it becomes universalized and there's a better understanding of disability, a lot more people will be willing to come out as disabled and reach these programs, which is a big help.
Maybe I can ask one question that could come from a legislator.
Mm-hmm.
So would these benefits be extended to sex offenders?
we would hope that regardless of the crime being committed, that every prisoner is granted quality of care. We understand that there is definitely when mentioning a violent criminal, the association with a person with disabilities and violent crimes is a stigma that I think that we're trying to combat as well with our definition. And so understanding that there are circumstances prior to imprisonment that might lead to something like that, that we obviously are not condoning, but at the same time, understanding that if we do choose to rehabilitate these people, we want them to have the best rehabilitation possible within the prison system. So I would say it's probably more on a case-to-case basis in that regard, but we would just hope that there's still care for them somewhere.
Yes.
So
It's time.
it's time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next on our list is University of San Francisco, Elizabeth Chan, Emilia Wilson, and Ravi. Oh man, I'm gonna screw this up again. I apologize.
You're good, don't worry.
Stellar horses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
Here in our script, not our script, our site list, you can follow along with the order of our speech.
Thank you.
Yeah, we also have a bunch of the citation lists. You guys wanna? Put one together.
Hello, hello. Okay, I can hear us. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, judges, for taking the time out of your day to come and have this dialogue with all of us. And thank you all for also being here in this discussion.
你有權利保持沉默。
ทุกสิ่งที่คนพูดสามารถใช้กับคนในศาลได้
Tienes el derecho a un abogado.
ถ้าคุณไม่สามารถจ่ายทนายความได้ พวกเราจะจัดทนายความให้คุณ Did anyone understand what we just said? This is how a non-native English speaker experiences court in the United States of America. They're put into these places of high stress and high tense situations, and furthermore, aren't given the adequate resources to be able to communicate across that effectively, and therefore are most susceptible to being misrepresented in court. My question to you is that fair? Moving along the chain of command, even our public defenders are given way too much work, therefore they're overworked, overwhelmed, and underpaid, and in direct violation of our Sixth Amendment. And the Sixth Amendment guarantees a fair and speedy trial. How can we have a fair and speedy trial if you have public defenders that are way overworked and have little to no time to spend on cases, and you have non-native English speakers who can't effectively communicate properly?
We read out the Miranda rights in 3 different languages: Spanish, Thai, and Cantonese. Our stakeholders are public defenders and non-native English speakers, as well as limited English proficient speakers. We have 3 arguments. We believe public defenders are overworked, overwhelmed, and underpaid, and non-native English speakers are not adequately represented and have insufficient resources for a fair trial. The justice system perpetuates injustices through the Sixth Amendment, and in order to abide by the Constitution, we need to prioritize these neglected groups. We are from the University of San Francisco. I'm Ali.
I'm Ravi.
And I'm Elizabeth. First, we need to ensure that public defenders can perform at the highest level in order to align with our Sixth Amendment. Where does public defenders come from? Well, public defenders come from a case called Gideon v. Wainwright. Gideon was charged with breaking and entering with the intent to commit a misdemeanor, which was a felony under Florida law. At trial, he requested for a lawyer, but the trial judge denied his request. So Gideon represented himself and was convicted. He later appealed his case and it went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution requires states to provide legal counsel if criminal defendants cannot afford one. Public defenders guarantees a person to receive counsel and therefore a fair trial. Public defenders are the upholders of the Sixth Amendment today. 80% of people facing criminal charges uses a public defender, which is 4 out of 5 criminal defendants.
So the use of public defenders is so widely used in our justice system, but at the same time, they are so overworked and completely underrepresented in our own justice system, which leads to that violation of our Sixth Amendment. Here are a few citations from page 1 of our citation list. Over page number 1 from the LAist. Next page, where we found that 50%, this is according to a study signed by 300 different public defenders in Los Angeles, who had said 50% considered quitting due to the workload. That's 1 in 2. Furthermore, 70% said that their workload is unmanageable, and 80% had said that they have no time to prep for cases. Furthermore, in 2007, a judge turned away between 2,000 to 19,000 cases. And these aren't just our words that we have claimed. These are also the words from the Director of Public Defenders from Missouri, who stated, word for word, because of the Sixth Amendment, Americans accused of crime have the right to representation. But that system that supports that right has been understaffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed, and also undervalued in this case, with cases for more than 30 years. These are citations on page 2.
There are also imbalances in the system. In 2018, the DA's office employed 10,500 people, while public defenders only employed 4,300. As a result, the amount of time public defenders can spend on a case as their counterparts are also unequal. For example, the public defender's office in New Orleans, they spend an average 7 minutes per case. According to New York Times in 2017, Jack Talaska, a public defender in Louisiana, he spends 5 work years to handle the 194 active felony cases he had in 1 year. Work study shows that he needed to do the work of 5 lawyers to serve his clients. Public defenders are low paid despite having high caseload. The funding for public defenders continues to be cut year after year. In Newsom's 2023 to 2024 proposed budget, the public defender's budget was cut by $50 million. This caused public outrage, causing Manuel Rajul, the elected public defender of San Francisco, to speak out, as well as some others. Referring to page 5 of the citation sheet, the graph below shows the disparity between the funding for public defenders and district attorneys. It shows that district attorneys nearly receive $1 billion more compared to public defenders.
Our second stakeholder is non-native English speakers, as well as limited English proficient speakers. We believe non-native English speakers should have the justice system's focus because they make up a large portion of the population, and the current system caters to English speakers. It is a human right to be heard. The Sixth Amendment protects that right in the courtroom. If the justice system claims to be impartial, they must reflect that in their practices. 1 in 5, or 43% of Californians, speak a language other than English at home, according to the US 2020 Census, page 6 of our citation sheet. That's 8 to 17 of us here today. That shows that people can't articulate themselves in the manner that they feel most comfortable, which is important in a place like a courtroom that has serious consequences. Limited English proficient speakers are tested in the courtroom with yes or no questions to determine their English comprehension in order to waive their right to counsel or an interpreter. And if they do have an interpreter, they're easily misrepresented by dialect, according to a Fordham 22 report shown on page 7 of the citation sheet. Non-native speakers are not adequately represented and don't have sufficient resources for a fair trial. 1 in 10 people speak little to no English at all, according to the Census of 2020. In the case of Ivanova versus Astrew, limited English proficient speaker could only write her name, and the court ruled that she didn't have the right to waive her counsel as her notices were only written in English, which is not an uncommon occurrence. Eviction notices don't need to be translated to the language that the tenant speaks natively, according to Frieden Williams' report in 2018. This is unfair and can lead to serious legal issues. We need more representation of non-native English speakers in positions of power in the justice system and more variations in translations of the English language.
So in conclusion, our public defenders are overworked, underpaid, and overwhelmed. And furthermore, our non-native English speakers aren't given the right methods and ways to communicate with the court of law, and which is a serious violation of the Sixth Amendment itself. This is like if you were to get on a plane and the pilot of the plane had no experience whatsoever, had no time whatsoever to prepare, and you had to get on that aircraft.
Thank you, guys.
Judges have 6 minutes to question.
So what is, in your research, what was the sort of number one sort of impact due to the lack of funding for public defenders and the lack of resources for limited English speaking or non-English speaking people?
I guess, so I'll go and take the first question to you with the public defenders. So the issue with that is that you don't have, like you have a system that's overwhelmed, yes, and that impact is that people aren't able to make their case in the most fluent way possible, so to speak. And with that being said, when you have a case that's being done so quickly by someone who's so overwhelmed with work, there is an extremely high chance that that person cannot perform to the best of their abilities, and therefore aren't able to adequately help that person if that person, let's say, was not guilty at all, be defended appropriately. I think there's a statistic in here that also says that about how the district attorney had, yes, it's around here somewhere. 1 second, we have many statistics there. So there was a lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU. This is on page number 2, 3, 4, where these public defender offices are so understaffed that they can't provide effective representation. And the statistic cites that a defense attorney in Fresno averages 1,462 cases a year, while the recommended caseload itself is 400. Therefore, public defenders are taking on 4 times the recommended caseload and aren't able to adequately serve each person to the best of their ability. Hence, re-emphasis on a violation of our 6th Amendment.
To speak to your portion of the question for non-native English speakers, as seen on page 8 of the citation sheet, which is the University of Mississippi, the second problem, which they say, is the difficulties of securing an interpreter, which violates the 6th Amendment right to a speedy trial. Interpreters are often very rare for different languages. There's not enough variation in legal language. 55% of all interpreters speak Spanish and 5% speak Vietnamese. And this doesn't represent the actual people that speak those languages at home. Therefore, the funding, we need more funding so we can have more variation in people that are interpreters. We need more representation with judges that speak native languages other than English, in order so the entire spectrum of languages have someone that they can speak directly to in a speedy, fair trial.
So I have to ask, who is Wainwright? Gideon versus Wainwright.
He's
To give you a hint, I've met him before he passed away.
he's the plaintiff.
He's the secretary of
Oh.
the Florida Department of Corrections.
So I want to circle back, because what I'm trying to get at here, did you, in your research, based on these 2 different groups, did you find, how were they disproportionately? So were there more convictions within these groups compared to somebody who had the resources to have a private lawyer compared to, or, compared to English-speaking criminal defendants?
There was a study done by the Department of Justice in 2000. It showed that like 76% of defendants that had a private attorney were convicted versus 88% with a public defender, which shows like a 12% difference.
Perfect. Thank you.
We also found with non-native English speakers that they were often misrepresented in lower courts, people with low income, lots of times people of color that would go in, and when there was misrepresentations of the language, it would often go unnoticed, and there would be consequences that could not be redacted.
Thank you.
And so is the solution really about funding, or are there other solutions that have been considered?
Well, I guess I could have a crack at this as well. The funding part is needed because of the way that, well, it's resources, right? Because money equals resources. And oftentimes our DA offices are given more resources to press in charge against cases. But the public defenders aren't really given that resources. I mean, they're qualified individuals. They just are understaffed and way overworked. By allocating the resources, even as, like, let's say even deallocating some from the DA to the public defenders, would help alleviate some of that pain, because at the same time, it's like a battle of 2 sides, and one side is clearly having more than the other. By balancing it all out, it should make it for a more fairer and just society.
We also, besides funding, but funding would definitely help, would just to be seeing more variation and representation. We need the people that speak other languages in these courtrooms, and the quality shouldn't vary by income.
Because somebody goes to a lower income court or somewhere that's local to them does not mean that they should have different quality than whether they go to the capital, like Sacramento, or go up to the Supreme Court. They should have the same exact quality and representation, and it shouldn't vary just because they speak a different language.
There are 15 seconds left.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for your comments, and it looks like we are on to Annette Louise, Alexia Daniels, and Kale Lachinas from the University of Laverne.
So we are the University of Laverne, and we support the prioritization of family as the stakeholders. My name is Alexia, and I will be talking about the parents of incarcerated individuals, while my partner will be talking about the children. First, I will be touching on the stripping of privacy that comes from the rise of media in criminal cases. And second, I will be talking about the barriers of family healing. As media presence increases in criminal activity, as a 2022 poll states, nearly half of Americans enjoy true crime or similar genres. There's been a rise in mass attention in criminal cases. This has resulted in social media crime investigators, like in cases like the Gabby Petito case. Issues of conspiracy theories arise, like the role of Brian Laundrie's parents, whose names were released in the Gabby Petito case, which then led a large community of crime conspiracists to deem the parents as accomplices in the crime their son had committed, influencing people to attack them and call them things like murderers. This problem of mass media attention leads to these same communities leaking information like addresses, workplaces, and other sensitive information. The issue is also prevalent with reporters who ask these parents as the closest connection to the person who committed the crime. They tend to ask more invasive questions and try to answer the "what went wrong" question. This has caused the parents to feel repercussions for actions they did not commit. Not only do they have to deal with the internal or emotional issues of having their child incarcerated, they are now in charge of being attacked by social media fanatics or journalists. It is for this reason that the consent from the parents needs to be prioritized. Names, addresses, and other private information of family must be protected. This is why we support a law that prevents the media from releasing this information of parents of incarcerated people, to prohibit severe and invasive media attention. With this, parents will be less likely to be doxxed and harassed in the media. The next issue that I will be discussing is the family healing problem and the problems that parents are currently facing. Incarcerated individuals' integration back into society relies on integration back into the family. This is to reduce the likelihood of recidivism and make healing easier for families. According to Leo Wang at the Prison Policy Initiative, prisoners who get 0 visits during their incarceration period are 6 times more likely to be reincarcerated. A prisoner's connection to the outside world is extremely important for reintegration, and we believe social connection to the parents is instrumental. As prisoners continue to be moved, at an average of 1,500 prisoners moved every week, according to an article in the Inside Times by Francis Cooney. A solution to this disconnection would include family therapy, a service in which a parent can communicate with their child and have a better understanding of what they might need upon release. An example of this currently would be the Friends Outside organization, who hold different services for these children and parents of incarcerated individuals. This is to create a better environment for the incarcerated individual and the families, as family counseling can strengthen families post-release, according to SDSU's article on barriers families face post-release. We believe that programs that the Friends Outside organization hold should be implemented in all prisons to help unify families and help parents connect with their children. And this will also reduce the likelihood of recidivism. With family therapy, reintegration of the incarcerated person is easier and serves as a healing tool for the family. We believe that the parents hold an important role in the discourse of the criminal justice system, and they are the stakeholders who need to be protected from the rise of media attention, specifically in criminal cases, and deserve a genuine connection with their child. My partner will speak next about the issues that the children of incarcerated people face, further exemplifying why family needs to be protected.
All right, like my partner said, my speech will be about the children of the incarcerated individual. This stakeholder group is among the most vulnerable and least talked about. Today, I will be putting a spotlight on the effects of parental incarceration on children and how to best alleviate them. First, I will discuss the psychological effects on children. Then I will present the impacts on their academic performance. Losing a parent to incarceration can be very traumatizing and very isolating for the children themselves. Many of the children have witnessed the physical arrests of their parents, and many of these arrests involved very violent cases, some of them like forceful entry into their own home, and even just seeing the cuffing of the parent and being taken away can be very scarring for the child. In a 2020 article from the Society for Research in Child Development, stated parental incarceration is associated with an increased likelihood of psychiatric diagnosis, including ADHD, conduct disorder, and depression. Some of the best ways to reduce those risks, the risk of those mental effects, include removing the barriers between the child and the incarcerated parent. Giving children easier access to contact and visit their parent can improve child-parent relationships and reduce recidivism among the incarcerated parents. One way to remove that barrier is to create a visitor bus program. In a 2021 public hearing with the New York State Assembly, they discussed the program that they once had that provided free transportation to individuals at no cost to any New York State prisons. We believe that this is a solution that should be implemented nationwide so that everyone can have easier access to their incarcerated relative. Another way to remove that barrier completely is to have designated rooms and correctional facilities for children to spend time with the incarcerated parent themselves. In a 2018 article by Justin Jovenel from the Toronto Star, interviewed an incarcerated mother with a newborn. When spending time with her newborn, she felt that she has something great now. She said that she has something to live for, and this is a great thing to have. Having a place for the parent and the child to spend time together is good for not just the child, but the incarcerated parent themselves. These rooms would give the child and parents precious time to talk and spend time together. Moving on, with higher likelihood of psychological problems, it could result in lower educational outcomes. The academic performance of the child can suffer greatly without specialized support of school staff and protections and programs that safeguard the well-being of the child in school. In the same 2020 article I stated from the Society for Research in Child Development, stated that children with incarcerated fathers have significantly lower GPAs and educational attainment than those who've never had incarcerated parents. In a proposal to the San Francisco United School District, Commissioner Matt Haney and Commissioner Shaman Walton mentioned Project What. Project What is a youth-led program for teens with incarcerated parents, and they asked the teens what they would have wanted to have as a resource while in school. And many of the responses were someone to talk to and therapy and counseling. To meet the needs of the children, it would include providing teachers and staff on how to best cater for the child with incarcerated parents, and to have specialized counselors working with children to better thrive in an educational environment. Providing support for the mental health of the students means that we would lead to the success of the students themselves. In our speeches, we see the dire need to focus on families and children. Solutions we need involve building bridges and connections for the families and not separating them. With that, the team from the University of La Verne proudly supports solutions that protect the family of incarcerated individuals. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The judges have 6 minutes to question.
You talked about the family therapy and the therapy for the children. Is that at the prison or at their houses, or any best practices there?
We would probably see that in terms of at their houses or at some sort of therapy site where these children and their parents would be able to go there if they are not currently incarcerated. But if they were to be incarcerated, I think it would be best for these children to seek therapy, not in the prison.
I don't know in your study, though, I found it very interesting, so thank you for drawing my curiosity around this idea how the media sort of highlights parents of children that committed high-profile crimes. Did you find that that could be a potential barrier to later would be sort of family healing?
I would say that it makes parents less likely to feel associated with their child because now they kind of feel guilty because that is like their child and they raised them and they feel like a sense of guilt even though they did not commit the crime. So they would be less likely to actually talk and spend time with their children.
As you looked at the examples of the recommendations that you gave of different programs, did they address when the children were the victim of the crime committed by the parent? Or have you thought through at least that aspect when the child was the victim of the crime?
We have not thought of where the child is a victim, but hopefully there could be a different program that would support those the children who are the victims of the actual crime themselves, maybe. But I think it's a bit separate from what we did talk about. We in our speeches, it was the assumption that they were just the child of the parent who committed a crime that was separate from the child themselves, just like being like just a part of that. Yeah.
In your research, was there any aspects that delineated between those that had shorter sentence and then some of the challenges, say when the incarceration was 20 years, 20 plus years?
We didn't, but I'm sure that the process within the therapy would be a little different. Let's say if it is 20 years, and that means there's a bigger disconnect between the child and the parent because they haven't been able to see them for so long. So if it is so much longer, I feel like there's a stronger need for that therapy and a stronger need for that connection during those 20 years. So I think it would be more emphasized during that time.
And then I want to make sure I understood the statistic as you talked about the movement of the incarcerated population, I'm assuming, within this system. Did you kind of address incarceration in relation to where the family was? Did that play out in terms of the aspect of the location of incarceration to the location where the family was, and any barriers that might have, or challenges that might have created?
Yes, as COVID has happened, a lot of prisons have gotten rid of like in-person visits, and they've been pushing like expensive video calling, and that has burdened the family economically. And then the moving of the people in the prisons has also created a barrier for these people not to be able to connect with their family members who are incarcerated.
Quickly, did you find any other factors that contributed to sort of childhood trauma around a parent being involved in the criminal justice system, other than being arrested in front of them?
Maybe probably like the disconnect between the child and the parent, especially when they're incarcerated, probably is the biggest trauma for the child, because now they're so far apart from a huge at least like person within like the home. Their parents are usually idols for these children, and being so far apart from these from the children can be very traumatizing and very isolating, and could just lead to many problems, because parents do bring stability to the home, especially when there's only like many kids and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a minute, 15 seconds. Up to the judges.
I'm good. I think I'm good. Yeah.
All right, judges yield. Thank you for your time. Okay, next on our list is Matthew Murrin and Anaí Marquez from Cal Poly.
Hello, I'm Matthew Mirren.
I'm Anaí Marquez, and we're representing Cal Poly.
Siblings and parents are key, overlooked, and underrepresented stakeholders affected by the adjudication of family members. Our case rests on a simple principle. If you can't be your brother's keeper, society must. Our case study focuses on Gabriel, a brilliant kid who was taken out of school and had to hear about how his brother, who was his best friend and his go-to person, was deep in a life of crime and would no longer be in his life. Gabriel was then forced to take over his siblings' responsibilities, forced to work a job on top of high school to keep the bills paid. His grades started to drop as he started to miss class, and Gabriel and any other kid in the same situation becomes more likely to commit the same crime as their sibling when employers won't take in an underage, tired employee. A national study conducted by Virginia Commonwealth University discovered a drastic increase in the likelihood of incarceration of one member of a family when another family member is in the criminal justice system. Gabriel is one of many examples of a person who lost all opportunities through no fault of their own, a person I'm sure we've all known at some point in our lives. There is no other effect of the criminal justice system that should be prioritized more than the lives and opportunities lost as a result of a family member's incarceration. Siblings and parents are most directly affected by the conviction of a sibling or a child, both due to the increased likelihood of perpetuated crime, as well as the negative economic shock that results after an arrest or an incarceration. The center of this discussion revolves around the real human experiences that are a byproduct of the American justice system, and no experience is more personal or should be prioritized more than the family members of the incarcerated.
Starting with our first stakeholder, siblings are adversely affected by incarcerations due to the power of influence siblings have over one another. The Atlantic's article, When a Sibling Goes to Prison, explores the reality that because the family size has declined over time, the complexity of sibling relationships has also increased over time. This means that sibling relationships are much more impactful nowadays. While in the average household, you would want nothing more than a close sibling relationship, when that relationship is corrupted by crime, what you find is two people leading one another to destruction. That destruction comes in two major areas. The first is the increased risk of substance abuse. The National Institute of Health explains that there is evidence that conflict in sibling relationships serves as a context for development of substance use. In simpler terms, siblings are oftentimes able to coerce or encourage each other into cycles of substance abuse, incarceration, or anything really, due to the fact that a dynamic of a close sibling relationship allows for this sort of influence to be possible. Secondly is the ability to influence one another into criminal activity like substance use then establishes an increased risk in offending adolescents. Sibling delinquency is identified as a risk factor for criminal offending in adolescents. Studies in the United Kingdom have attempted to put a focus on this largely invisible population in the criminal justice system. These siblings are at an increased risk of becoming offenders themselves, especially brothers. And then they're at risk for considerably more physical and mental health problems. The unfortunate reality of the situation is that these individuals are the hidden victims of a system that neither acknowledges or provides a platform for them to be heard. There is no one checking in or giving these siblings a chance at having a normal life.
Our second stakeholder is parents. Parents are the most directly affected economically by the criminal justice system, exacerbating systemic issues of poverty within the country. When a child is arrested or charged with a crime, many parents are given a choice. Will they preserve their economic stability, or will they pay the bail amount, the subsequent court and trial fees, and attempt to give their child the best possible chance to have a fair trial? Gary Becker, who won the Nobel Memorial Prize of Economic Sciences in 1992, highlights the connection between economic pressure and crime under his simple economic theory of crime. A study conducted by the European Review of Economic History reveals engaging as crime as a more opportune relative to participating in more peaceful economic relatives, especially after experiencing a negative economic shock. In the real world, best case scenario, parents are able to pay these court and trial fees, but by doing so, they derail any other life aspirations they have. In this modern economy, jobs that not only work with the packed schedules of these individuals, but also provide for this added economic need are few and far between. And far more likely outcome is that one or both parents turn to the accessible money that crime can potentially provide, just like the already incarcerated family member did. Crime is especially more prevalent in low-income communities due to a lack of work opportunities, especially as inflation is rising and the cost of living in the US is more unattainable than ever. The Federal Reserve Board of Governors Nicholas Turner was able to conclude that boys who grew up in families in the bottom 10% of income distribution are about 20 times more likely to end up in prison in their 30s than boys born into the top 10. So when families in this situation lose a sibling or a child in the criminal system, not only is a source of income taken away, but an added economic pressure of trial and court costs is introduced into an already strained budget. Even if these parents aren't driven into a life of crime in order to keep up with their living expenses, these costs drive parents to work more jobs, work longer hours, and pay with money that could have been instead put towards mortgages, car payments, or even a better education for other children in the family. As explained by research professors at George Washington University, educational opportunities are cast aside in favor of the incredibly difficult act of staying afloat in modern society. As a result, the cycle of crime within families is perpetuated across many different communities, spanning generations, and keeping the poor poor. If these family members of the incarcerated are not supported by the justice system, they are the most likely individuals to fall into the same patterns as their family members. By supporting the family unit, we can become our brothers, sisters, and children's keepers and create a culture of compassion in the criminal justice system.
These stakeholders are influenced mostly due to their proximity to the offender. There was no one genetically and physically more associated with those in the criminal justice system. Siblings and parents are integral sources of emotional and financial support. The National Institute of Health explains that incarceration separates individuals. It strictly limits and controls their contact with the outside world. There's a drastic shift in contact once someone is in prison. On average, they have between 10 and 15 minutes a day to communicate with their loved ones. The Journal of Research in Crime and Delinquency identifies that maintaining family ties during incarceration facilitates positive post-relief functioning. Individuals who have contact with family during incarceration are less likely to offend. Maintaining these relationships can increase the likelihood of post-release employment opportunities. Their direct, deep economic and genetic connection secures these stakeholders vital to the criminal justice system and people we must continue to prioritize.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Judges have 6 minutes to question.
So can you just develop out a little bit more for me is how, the how of what you're recommending? I see the problem statement. You know, what examples of programs or policies would actually support the families?
Yes, there are current programs to support families that exist today, but they're not extensive enough. One example of this is assisting families of inmates, which is a program in Virginia, but it's only one of a handful of programs in that state. And we'd recommend the expansion of these existing programs, as well as a more centralized government program that can provide assistance and access that outside programs cannot provide. And this funding would come from areas from within the government, as you said. The funding, and as you can see, the prioritization of different stakeholders and different programs is seen through what the government funds. And this is something that the government should absolutely prioritize and put funding towards.
So in just again, sort of, I hear the problem statement, but so in the ideal world, how would the criminal justice system actually address the issue of siblings involved in the system?
I can start. I think the majority of our case focuses on taking the root cause, which is just because siblings are so close, they influence each other almost directly. And so going into just the solvency of our case, which we didn't just, we were saving that for questioning, there's a lot of mandated family therapy that could provide a much needed solution for this cause. And I think the identifier of having these siblings as a stakeholder is because they're not paid attention to, no one is checking in on them. And so implementing systems in which they are checked in upon, which could be through mandated family therapy, then we can have sort of a check-in system with them, which would allow for these harms to be solved.
Okay.
So like I asked before, what if the family is the victim of the crime?
Absolutely. Again, a lot of this, diving into that conflict could help through family therapy and really the root cause of the conflict between those family members. And again, visiting hours, and this is really, it's still up to the family members and really deciding what would be best for them, and whether that's personal therapy to help with really getting over what their family member did, or just diving into the issues and what really caused the crime in the first place, can help a lot of people work through that issue and really get some closure in the situation, which can help them move on if they want to.
In your study, were there any good interventions? What if there's multiple siblings? What if it's a generational? Was there any good models or things you saw that, or promising practices that you could sort of address?
I think a lot of our case, like a part of the solvency was just having family connections. And so since a lot of people who end up in prison rely on their families for emotional support and financial support once they're after their sentence is served out, I think a lot of the problem, or just a lot of the way that we can go about solving this issue, is maintaining strong family ties, just because if you look at just the effects on recidivism, you can see that having close family ties allows for their reintegration into society a lot more smooth. And so if it's on a sibling to sibling basis, I think a core root of that problem is just not having the fundamentals to have a successful relationship, or a relationship that has the fundamentals to succeed or push each other into a more positive light. So I think in general, just programs that help facilitate that would solve it.
And speaking more on the multiple sibling question, part of the question, again, the influence siblings have on each other, especially older siblings to younger siblings, we see a much higher rate in that. So we see a much higher rate of older sibling delinquency. And in many cases, these younger siblings, and in our case study, Gabriel was looking up to an older sibling and then mirroring that behavior. And that can be on a multiple sibling basis and a single sibling basis. So we see that kind of throughout the number of siblings in kind of the case study.
So as part of your research, you mentioned the telephone time. Were there any other things that would inhibit communication from outside in and inside back out?
I think just on part of the the telephone communication, even that access is really dependent on what's going inside the prison, or just what's going on inside the prison. So that cell phone communication is just contingent on whether or not it's safe to have that communication in the first place, and that is really dependent on corrections officers and whatever issues are going within the jail. So it's just never guaranteed that time to talk. And so I think going off of that.
All right, that's time.
All right, good.
No, I've got it back. All right, thank you for your comments. We would like to welcome, next on here, it looks like we have Eden Mackey and Hannah Brooke from Patrick Henry College.
Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Brooke.
And I'm Eden Mackey.
And we represent Patrick Henry College in Virginia.
I can get started whenever we're ready.
Good.
Okay. Anya is 9 years old. Her mom's standing at the kitchen sink, doing dishes. Is she crying? Anya can't tell. Her mom's strong. She has to be. Anya's dad was caught stealing clothes again. He's now in prison, just like his dad was before him. Anya doesn't know this yet, but her dad won't return until she's grown up. He won't be back for 12 years. Benjamin's sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. He's fought poverty his whole life, and he's now on top. He owns a construction company close to where he grew up. Last month, he won a contract to build a new community center. Now, it's all at risk. This morning, he found out that his foreman won't be able to make it in. He was arrested on a drug charge and is now facing up to 10 years in prison. During the keynote lecture before lunch, General Inch brought up 4 classic reasons for the justice system, that of retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation. But we think that the 5th reason, restoration, is especially tied to today's question of forgotten stakeholders. The idea of restoration is to make something whole again, to fill in a void. When someone is incarcerated, it leaves a hole in communities, in families, and workplaces. The purpose of the criminal justice system is to protect communities and keep them safe, which is sometimes achieved through incarceration. However, when the void left behind by incarceration is not addressed, the community's future is jeopardized. In order to protect the whole community and achieve holistic justice, we believe it is crucial to discuss two primary stakeholder groups that are not typically included in the conversation. The first is the children of the incarcerated, and the second is the businesses affected by incarceration.
The first underrepresented stakeholder group that we believe should be prioritized are the children of those being processed in the criminal justice system. According to the Vera Institute in 2021, over 5 million children in the United States have experienced the incarceration of a parent. And as the National Institute for Justice noted, children with incarcerated parents are not the only ones affected. They said, quote, "If we consider the full continuum of the criminal justice process, arrest, pretrial detention, conviction, jail, probation, imprisonment, and parole, the number of children affected is significantly larger," end quote. When a parent commits a crime, a child has no method of preventing it. Yet, a child still experiences the negative ramifications of that crime. According to Duke University sociologist Christopher Wildman, children whose parents are caught in the criminal justice system experience more of a downward spiral into adulthood. This can affect their social relationships, their educational prosperity, and their involvement in the community around them. Fragile Family data also shows that the risk of being homeless dramatically increases for children with incarcerated parents. And that's even after socioeconomic issues and previous housing problems are taken into account. For a young child, a toddler, or an elementary school kid, they watch their parent be taken away from them at one of the most key developmental stages of their life. A teenager also watches their parent be taken away from them, but are then found the focus of stigma and looked at by their peers differently. And this is through no fault of their own. And in light of this, as a result, children that experience these effects have been seen 6 times more likely to commit crimes themselves, which is a major problem in the criminal justice system. Because the system does not adjust for these impacts, it does not offer children the appropriate infrastructure to succeed. A child in their developmental years must be protected from circumstances outside of their control that manipulate them into behavioral patterns that they will have to deal with for their entire lives. This could look like individualized responses from social workers and increased communication with school administrators, attempting to mitigate the experience of students that are dealing with the incarceration of a parent. Children deserve access to a sustainable future, one not tainted by their parents' mistakes.
The second underrepresented shareholder group we believe should be prioritized is the businesses affected by incarceration. The United States has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world, and most of its prisoners are men, ages 19 to 39. The Center for Economic and Policy Research estimates that the U.S. loses between $57 billion and $65 billion in annual output from the gap these men leave behind. While in prison, the men leave a void in the workplace, and when they're released, many find it very challenging to re-enter the workforce. However, the focus of this is not on the prisoners themselves. After all, today, we're not asked to discuss prisoners, but those outside, an outside stakeholder. Instead, the focus is on the businesses that their absence affects. A comprehensive report published 2 days ago by the Journal on Poverty Law and Policy found that while labor demand is high, even skyrocketing currently, that, quote, labor participation rates amongst prime age men have continued to decline, end quote. The current rate is lower than it was even during the Great Depression. Both the Georgetown Report and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce connect this low labor participation rate to incarceration. This is especially troubling because thriving businesses are crucial to raising income levels and increasing opportunity, which not only reduces recidivism, but also protects the community's future. Yet small businesses are disproportionately affected by incarceration. According to the US Small Business Administration, low-income rural areas have lower levels of population density, which makes sense, which can restrict the pool of available skilled labor. Low-income urban areas have a lack of business infrastructure that certainly isn't helped when people are removed from the workforce for long periods of time. When people are removed for long periods of time, businesses suffer. Those low-income areas remain low-income areas because they are lacking the people to lead them out. An analysis by the Prison Policy Initiative concluded that many of those in prison have histories of household instability, poverty, and lack of opportunity, all of which can be aided through thriving businesses. While there have been some encouraging initiatives here, such as loan programs for ex-felons and sentencing reform, more research should be conducted. The research is lacking here. The data is lacking. But this area is one that is absolutely key to protecting the whole community and achieving holistic justice.
Both of these stakeholder groups, through no fault of their own, experience the negative ramifications of the criminal justice system. The underlying theme between these stakeholder groups is the idea of preserving a sustainable future. Children are the future of our nation. So are our businesses and our economy. Because these two stakeholder groups are not discussed as much as they should be, we ask you to prioritize them higher and allow for a sustainable future, as well as a building of the community and a re-emphasizing of restoration. Thank you, and we're now subject to your questions.
Thank you for your comments. Judges, you have 6 minutes.
Okay, so I'll be the broken record. Also, when the family or the children are the victims of the crime, how does that impact your thoughts in what you presented?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the context of the conversation of stakeholder groups, victims as a category are separate from children of incarcerated parents that we're talking about today. So while I think that it is absolutely majorly relevant to prioritize the fostering of therapy and prioritize the effects that being a victim of a crime that your parent committed against you, that's not necessarily the priority of what we're looking at right now. What we're looking at is essentially a hole that is left, not only in a community, but also in a family, when a parent who did not commit a crime against a child is incarcerated. And of course, sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a strong relationship between the parent and the child. And so that's a case-by-case basis that would have to be taken into account. But having two parents, or having at least a stable existing framework in a family or one parent, is incredibly instrumental in a child's development. And so we would distinguish those two things, but they're equally as important. We just believe that this stakeholder group deserves to be discussed more, as victims are frequently in the conversation.
So I may sound like a bit of a broken record too, a bit. So what role does the criminal justice system play, I guess, in, let's take the children. How would that look like? Let's just use a court of law. How should a judge sort of look at this when imposing a sentence on a parent?
On a parent?
Yeah.
I believe that because one of the 4 penological goals of the criminal justice system is retribution, that just because perhaps a criminal has a child, that doesn't mean necessarily that the sentence should be lessened. But I believe a lot of people have brought up really strong points about maybe including a little bit more leeway for visitation, or even including in the courtroom process, maybe accommodations depending on the age of the child, depending on the nature of the crime, and just depending on the circumstances surrounding the whole issue. And so insofar as sentencing, I don't think that having a child should change how justice is administered by a judge. But I do believe that we should consider how children are affected when their parents are not only just being incarcerated, but being put on trial, as that in of itself can have long-lasting impacts on not only how they view their parents, but how they view the criminal justice system and the United States government as a whole.
Thank you.
I was thinking about the business owner that had the contract and the foreman, was arrested, and so that business was impacted. Do you have solutions for that or thoughts about what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to what my partner was stating, the fact that a business is losing someone doesn't mean that their sentence should be reduced or that that should affect the sentencing process, because of course there's lots of different perspectives that have already entered the conversation that determine an appropriate sentence. But at the same time, we see that it's very difficult for a person who has left the workforce and has that gap on their resume to re-enter the workforce. And so again, we would address, or we would propose several different solutions that would include the mentorship of people within prison so that that re-entry into the workforce is easier. And when we look at evidence from, say, the Manhattan Institute, we found that people who have gotten that intense mentorship during prison actually have a lower recidivism rate than people who did not have that mentorship. So it does improve the community, and also we have that prison to job pipeline that is able to ensure that that talent is continued and isn't just lost when someone goes to prison.
There hasn't been much discussion on what businesses could do to assist correctional agencies in vocational training. Did you read anything in that realm, or do you have any thoughts of how community can bring their resources to bear for vocational training?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this kind of ties into a question that was asked earlier during the keynote lecture about the seminary programs that exist within prisons, and even the ministry opportunities that exist within prisons. We think that's a fantastic idea, and we want to extend that to business mentorship or entrepreneurship mentorship, where individuals within these communities are able to actually assist people within the prison and form those relationships, form those connections within. So of course, we think that there is institutional change that could occur, but at the same time, and more importantly, we think it's much more effective to pursue that granular approach where the community invests into the prisons in order to ensure that the community is thriving afterwards, especially in terms of business.
So using that sort of concept, or that sort of way of thinking about it, how does this look like for the children of those that are incarcerated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that fostering conversations about taking care of children and communities coming around children, not even just children in of themselves, but other parents that now have to carry not only a financial burden, but the burden of raising a child and having to explain to them the complexity of what's going on in their life. I think that having incentives in the system or having information that is accessible for the community is going to be something that helps them in the long run. So again, like by incentivizing the community to invest in children that need structure, that will then most likely give children the structure to succeed, which will then in turn decrease the chance of them entering the criminal justice system as a byproduct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe that brings us to Peter Perry, Kendrick Lacerda, and Antonio Gomez from the University of San Francisco, our last team to present today. Before we move to round two.
Just to preface, I'm going to be using my phone to time myself just because I can't see.
That seems completely reasonable.
Thank you.
Okay. Use it as speak. Speaking now. 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to have a choice in where I would be attending high school. I would either spend the next 4 years continuing the public school track at a high school named Menlo Atherton or a prestigious boarding school named Milton Academy. I chose Milton. Since then, I have observed some alarming actions and inactions in relation to the prison to school pipeline, which unveil disturbing realities behind the modern criminal justice system and illuminate to me why school boards and teachers and students must be the two stakeholders whose voices should be most heard. The school to prison pipeline is a national phenomenon in which schools are pushed to prioritize their own interests over the mental health and future of the children they serve. At Milton Academy, someone in my dorm was accused of rape by 5 different girls during senior year. My institution handled the situation with the utmost discretion. For most matters of discipline at my school, a normal discipline committee is commissioned in which students are involved in the process of choosing the punishment. However, this expulsion was handled with extreme secrecy. No mental health resources were provided to the student to protect future potential victims. Instead, he was simply discarded. The situation sharply contrasts with a recent story from Menlo Atherton High School. An underage male pushed a school administrator and yelled homophobic slurs at him. Without hesitation, the school immediately called the police. Upon approaching the subject, the police claim he walked away and resisted. They tackled and handcuffed him. Once again, there was no emphasis on mental health.
If we want to address these issues and the school-to-prison pipeline at large, it is essential to amplify the voices of school boards as vital stakeholders in the criminal justice system. School boards are responsible for overseeing the education system and ensuring that students receive the best education possible. With this information, let me tell you a little bit about why school boards have the keys to solve the issues of the school-to-prison pipeline. First, school boards have a vested interest in making their communities better. School board members are members of the local community and they volunteer to be elected for their positions. As such, if they are given the proper resources to utilize their powers, they will enact positive change. Second, school boards are the ones with the power to enact positive change. If school boards are given proper resources, they can implement policies that will address the school-to-prison pipeline and empower our second stakeholder group, teachers and students.
As Kendrick stated, our second stakeholder group are teachers and students, because these are the people who define the generations of today and those of tomorrow. In regard to teachers, we all understand that they have the capacity to change lives. We argue that by better being able to support our teachers, they can better support our youth. This is evident in the education disparities that are apparent between less and more affluent communities. In regard to students, we all see how these are people who will define our generation moving forward. They are our future. And as such, we ought to treat them with the utmost patience, respect, and willingness to repair harm as they continue to grow. Because as young adults, they can't always grasp the implications of their actions that could transform their lives. Such actions can throw them into harsh cycles of disciplinary actions, as well as leading to cycles of arrest.
Sorry, my computer is frozen. Now let me finish each of the stories I began earlier. Charges against a student at the public high school are being filed for battery on a school official and a hate crime. Meanwhile, the student at the elite high school was able to transfer to a new high school and now attends a good college in a foreign country. Through these stories, I must both highlight the inequality of outcomes for students who are in poverty and analyze how, even across socioeconomic classes, the school board and teacher-student dynamic is often incredibly callous. The Newfield Foundation and University of Edinburgh both claim that children exposed to poverty and trauma are more likely to commit crimes even much later in life. So, in not trying to provide a student the mental health assistance they need, an institution isn't just doing a disservice to the student, but also to society. Now, I will further discuss the earlier Menlo Atherton High School case study in a broader framework. Atherton has a school district boundary that encompasses the wealthiest families in the country. In contrast, Ravenswood City School District encompasses East Palo Alto, in which many students are housing or food insecure, and after accounting for need, receive less funding per pupil than the aforementioned district. Yet both of these school districts, segregated by socioeconomic status, feed into the same high school, Menlo Atherton, putting impoverished students at a significant disadvantage. These gaps in neighboring cities in terms of quality of life, crime rates, race, and education exist all over the country, especially in major cities like LA, Chicago, and Boston. Since education is legally required for all students, it is not unreasonable to make the case that school is the root area of focus that will lead to the greatest change in the criminal justice system. Additionally, since poverty and hardships are correlated with increased crime rates, we can observe how members of disadvantaged communities are destined to be more vulnerable in the justice system. Based on the information presented, a potential solution to address educational inequality and associated justice issues in our country is to increase the use of federal government taxes to fund education in a manner that factors in the cost of living, and use property taxes more equitably so all members of society have a vested interest in every child. Such an approach could alleviate many of the challenges faced by impoverished individuals who didn't have access to an equitable education, as 75% of American state prisoners are high school dropouts. Alternatively, redrawing school district boundaries could also be considered, with an emphasis on ensuring that impoverished areas have access to the resources available in wealthier neighborhoods nearby. While some schools already take a set number of students from areas of heightened poverty, possibly to increase diversity levels, this current process is inherently unjust and leaves behind many who then lack resources and support.
If these policies are enacted that give school boards the resources to implement positive change, they will develop youth diversion programs that will solve these issues of the school to prison pipeline. For example, Santa Clara County school boards developed a pilot program in 2018 that provided restorative justice services to young women. These services include hiring dedicated staff that acted as liaisons between schools and the justice system. Local correction offices and probation offices work with these liaisons to provide students with services before incarcerating them or putting them on probation.
When discussing the school to prison pipeline, we need to understand a statistic from the ACLU. That means that on any given day, there are 60,000 youth incarcerated. So, when we are trying to discuss how to solve the school to prison pipeline and enact a more just society, we need to begin this conversation by looking at our two stakeholder groups, that being our school boards and our teachers and students. By promoting cooperation between them and uplifting their advocacy, we allow ourselves to create transformations within our schools' fundings. By allowing them to advocate, they can create more federal distribution of taxes, as well as enacting rezoning laws. And from these new resources, we could see changes within youth diversion programs and initiatives in restorative justice that have been proven to transform the lives of students everywhere.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
that's the time. Judges, you have 6 minutes.
So drawn from the example you gave, it being a high school level, is your solution set at the high school level, or do you envision that going earlier? And if earlier, how early?
Yeah, that's a great question. These for the restorative justice programs in Santa Clara County, it was done county-wide. So they include elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And I just, for the sake of making sure that we are on time, I didn't describe the impact of it. Since the program's inception in 2018, it reduced detention rates by 58%. And I have another example that happened at Cole School in West Oakland, which implemented similar restorative justice programs. And they saw that 2 years after the program's inception, suspension rates dropped from a rate of 50 out of 100 students per year to 6 out of 100 students per year, which is an 87% decrease in only 2 years.
Not only that, but also within high school and middle school and elementary school, a lot of people, like based off the statistics before adjusting for need, a lot of people would assume or would see the statistics in the amount distributed to public schools and think that they're relatively equivalent, but that's not accounting for need. So actually during the coronavirus, in this specific case study example with Menlo Atherton High School, with the Ravenswood City School District, which is the middle school that feeds into Menlo Atherton High School, the school was actually having to give like gift cards, like Walmart gift cards, to like students because they were they were food and housing insecure. So they actually had to give a bunch of the money that was coming in to fund the school and for learning. They actually had to provide that for like basic essentials for the students. And the obviously wealthy comparable schools didn't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. So you guys jumped into some of the resourcing focus, and you talked about obviously approaching federal coffers as part of getting the distribution. Are you also recommending a transferring of property tax money between counties so that the more affluent counties are actually helping to do that balance, since that's where most of the school money comes from?
Yeah, exactly. So we think that there could be a federal government body, possibly a new one, that basically handles the redistribution of property taxes in a way that takes into account the cost of living of the area, of course, but also the economic needs of institutions. And the second thing to that is that's obviously, like, some people would say that's pretty extreme, and the counter argument to that, a lot of people would say, hey, if I'm paying this much for my property taxes, that should be going to a school that my student is attending, right? So that's why we have a backup plan, which is more so focusing on redrawing school border, like lines, school district lines, because like basically rezoning school district lines, not only because those are kind of following, they're very similar in terms of like the tax bracket lines and like loan lines, and those have historically been like racially like drawn and basically racist and things like that, and disadvantage poor communities and stuff. So if we redraw those lines to like have wealthy individuals and people in poverty in the same school district, then wealthy individuals will basically have a vested interest in the lives and education and future outcomes of students or members of the community who are impoverished, basically.
You also mentioned mental health assistance. Can you talk a little bit more about that, what that might look like?
Yeah, for sure. For the Oakland school example that happened at Cole Middle School, a core part of the restorative justice services was hiring staff that sort of mediated conflict resolution. It's pretty interesting. Whenever issues would come up in class, they would have group or one-on-one discussions, and they would just talk about it. And it sounds crazy, right? You're just talking about your feelings and stuff, but it resulted in a 87% decrease. So they provided mental health services in that respect. The example in Santa Clara County School Districts, the liaisons that worked with correction offices and probation offices did also try and divert students to mental health counselors before considering punitive measures of either incarcerating them or putting them on probation.
And to further articulate the scope of the particular Oakland's example, not only was this just between students, but teachers were involved as well. One-on-one interactions between teachers and the student in themselves were shown to be very effective. A poll within the same study illustrated how everybody involved very well understood what was happening. They understood the conversation practices and how this was better handling just simply repairing harm and discussing what steps to take forward.
Also, I just want to mention that one thing that's really important is I feel like this is the best option to choose, like tackling school boards and students and teachers, like kind of bridging, like fostering a community where they can converse with each other. Good.
That's time.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There's a cord right here. There you go. You wave it over. All right. So at this time, what we're going to do is we are going to invite the competitors to step out of the room and strategize with each other. They have 10 minutes to lift one idea from a competing team and incorporate it into their own proposal, and then tell us why that incorporation makes their package the best complete package. If you're not competing, you should feel free to use the restroom, grab a snack, do these all other things. When we are done, we will call the teams back in one by one in a closed session to deliver their final pitch. All right, it looks like our team from NSU Denver has returned, so if we can get judges to refocus and, judge.
Are we ready?
Whenever you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon. Davina, Albany, and I are excited to have been able to participate in this discussion here today. We are so honored to have been able to hear the ideas posed by the other competitors. As we have listened to the presentations by all of these fantastic participants, an idea brought up by the team of Laverne stood out to us, and we would like to incorporate it to revise our case presentation. First, Davina will discuss the problem we posed in our presentation surrounding the financial strains of virtual family visitation, and then Albany will move on to discuss the proposed solution by Laverne that we would like to incorporate and elevate within our presentation.
The reason that we wanted to include ideas from Laverne was because they had many implementation strategies that directly correlated with problems we had brought up in our previous speech. Our main idea was we wanted to highlight the financial strain families fall victim to. This connects both of our stakeholders, employers and children of incarceration. Laverne did a fantastic job in identifying the problem, expensive video conferencing. I will now pass it to my teammate Albany to discuss the solution posed by the team from Laverne.
As the team from Laverne discussed, one solution, as Davina reiterated before, is the visitor bus program. This program would allow children and their incarcerated parents to spend more time with one another, and it also allow children to have healthy attachment styles with their parents as they are away. We really appreciated this innovative solution to the problems we have dove into in depth, and we believe it is the best way to fix those problems.
As we've listened to a lot of the arguments by all of the different schools today, one thing that has really stood out to us is this cyclical nature of our current criminal justice system. One person offends and it ends up affecting other people, family members, parents, children. And ideally, we want to find a way to engage in this system in a way that stops that cycle. We discussed the concept of retribution and how we didn't want it to impact innocent parties such as children. And we believe that this solution posed by Laverne can help us accomplish that within the context of our presentation. We really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak here today, the time given to us by our wonderful judges and our audience. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know how they do it in the other towns around here.
Ready? Yes. You ready? Okay. We're going to start with a story about a girl named Eden. Unlike most of the children that we talked about today, neither of her parents were incarcerated. However, her family had their own struggles. Her father is an alcoholic, and her mother has bipolar disorder. And therefore, they were never able to hold a steady job, causing Eden to come from an extremely impoverished family. Because her family did not have substantial wealth, she grew up in an area with a very poor educational system. And going into high school, her older sister recognized the issues that had come with this poor educational system and told Eden that she needed to try and get out of her school district into one that would provide a stronger education and more support systems. She transferred to the Sage Academy at Elk Grove High School. We have already discussed the importance of after-school and classroom programs, and we would like to bring into the picture what the University of San Francisco talked about, specifically Peter, Kendrick, and Antonio, about impoverished children being a crucial stakeholder in the criminal justice system. Let's bring our attention back to Eden's story. She was able to become a part of the Sage Academy and the Future Farmers of America organization at Elk Grove High School. What this provided to her was numerous benefits that completely changed the path of her life.
Through the classroom and the 7 agricultural educational teachers, she was able to gain strong mentorship of people who actually believed in what she was doing. She was also able to gain financial stability. There are numerous competitions within this organization where you can win prize money and also sell the agricultural products that you produce as a part of your supervised agricultural experience. Through this money, she was able to buy herself a car, which allowed her to more easily come to school and interact with these positive after-school programs. And she also was able to gain scholarships and savings that now allow her to live in Davis and attend UC Davis full-time. She's pursuing a degree in agricultural education and will have a much stronger future than any of her siblings and a much stronger future than what her parents provided for her. This is why we believe that classroom and after-school programs are able to help impoverished children the most. Education is known as the great equalizer because public education is one of the only systems that is accessible to every single part of society. Children learn from the environment around them, and so giving them a positive, strong school system is essential.
Impoverished children are more likely to unfortunately commit crime because honestly, a lot of these communities are over-policed and over-criminalized, not due to these children themselves, but simply because of a bias that exists in our current society. These children and communities are often lacking in the resources that help children gain a way out of a cycle of impoverishment to imprisonment. However, school systems and after-school systems provide them an avenue away from this. Additionally, a lot of times, impoverished kids and their communities don't have the ability of having schools that provide specific programs that help them avoid incarceration. Opportunities like counseling, after-school programs, diversification of classes, and a better teacher-to-student ratio are not always options for these students. So they are lacking already in the availability that more affluent students have. Additionally, impoverished students oftentimes already have an incarcerated parent, making them 6 times more likely to commit. Additionally, they are further impoverished because they have one parent that is not able to provide for them. Before I finish my speech, I want to talk about one of my favorite books and one that's very dear to my heart, To Kill a Mockingbird. In that book, there's a character named Mrs. Dubois who has a camellia bush, and she says some very racist things to one of the main characters, Jem, who decides to take a stick to her flower bushes and try to ruin them. However, she tells him that because he did not get to the root of the camellia bushes, he did not stop them from growing. This is exactly what we are trying to tackle today. To get to the root of a systematic problem, you need to uproot it completely. By tackling the issue of children, school systems, and after-school programs, you are getting to the root. We heard a lot of teams talk about recidivism. The number one way to stop recidivism is to stop incrimination. If we are able to stop criminalizing children, we are able to stop prisoners from rescinding to imprisonment. Thank you.
There's a mic right there, so I'm not saying that.
That mic's off.
That's fine. Yeah, so we have a dartboard. Yeah, I was gonna do, yeah, that's right. Yeah. We'll be casting stones to see. It's tough, I would not want to see.
again. Today we're going to be reiterating what we had said earlier about our stakeholders being people within the disabled community as well as the homeless community. And our third relevant stakeholder that we're going to be adding is children. As mentioned multiple times within the previous speeches, we think that children are definitely a relevant stakeholder, and specifically the root being children within the school system not being addressed properly. So referring to how we view disability as being something that can affect anybody anytime, we think that it is important that school faculty and teachers themselves are trained to identify that children's expressing problems in school normally isn't contributed to the ability of the student unwillingness to participate in the school system. Normally it's other causes that normally we don't know about because they're happening at home. And so my partner will explain a little bit more about that.
Yes, so the reason why we've chosen specifically more so the classroom environment is because while we believe that the disabled and homeless communities are the most relevant stakeholder, we do think it is very important to enact preventative measures in order to to prevent as many people from entering these communities as possible. And we think, as my colleague mentioned, that by decriminalizing behaviors in the classroom can help students be introduced to a system of care before they continue to be introduced to a punitive cycle. So as a lot of people mentioned, there are often not, when a student is high risk for reincarceration, there are often not a lot of structure at home. And so our goal is to, by doing preventive measures and prioritizing the education, is introducing students to spaces that allow them to see a system of care.
So going off of the last speaker's example of the Oakland Unified School District and the measurements that they had put into place to decrease their suspensions, I think it's really important that we recognize that over the course of just a few years, they were able to reduce suspensions from being 50 out of 100 or 57 out of 100 to 6 out of 100, meaning that 87% decrease is very important to understanding that staff-mediated conflict resolution is vital to understanding the problems that students are facing. Thinking about if a student is facing homelessness, how that's going to affect their education is definitely vital to seeing how teachers can intervene and provide resources that maybe their home lives aren't providing. So another example is we're thinking about primary education and the need for care over punity, and realizing that at a really young age, students get in their brain these stereotypes that we had mentioned about disabilities. When a student acts out in a classroom, normally they're labeled as being disruptive, when in case it might be because of a disability that they're misdiagnosed with or not diagnosed with at all. So seeing that teachers are normally the people that can see that firsthand, and a lot of times, you know, like during that day, parents normally get like the latter half of the day, which they're probably not seeing how their students are or how their kids are interacting with other students. So identifying right now that within the education system, the way that it works is that it takes multiple years for kids to get properly diagnosed, and it's such a timely manner that it takes like multiple outbursts for a kid to be diagnosed or be referred to a physician instead of in turn being referred to the police officer on campus instead. So we definitely see a need for teachers to be trained in a way that enacts this conflict resolution and has these conversations that are hard hitting that a lot of parents might not be able to have with their student or with their kids. And we would like to say that recognizing, again, the complexities of these situations and understanding how we can better prepare our services to accommodate everybody under the law is vital to reform these policies.
by uplifting community voices and listening to those within the disabled community as well as the homeless population to take a more safe and holistic approach to our current system. Thank you.
Any questions?
Oh, are we doing more questions? No?
Nope.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Hello, everybody. We're back. It's University of San Francisco. Whenever you're ready.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. The concept that we adapted for our presentation is one introduced by Cal Poly team. It is intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality in 1989. She said, "It is a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves and create obstacles that often are not understood among conventional ways of thinking."
Moving along, we start to break down to see what are the percentage breakdowns between population that speak native and non-native speakers of English. For our native speakers, 78% happen to be white, while 19% of the whites are also non-native English speakers. But if we look more deeply into the other races, we see that there's a huge disparity between the percentage of being native speakers and non-native English speakers. For example, Hispanics make up only 5% of native English speakers, and by contrast, 62% of non-native English speakers. And this also can have effects in court. If you look at Blacks, for example, Black population, of which 13% are native speakers, and while 3% happen to be non-native English speakers. And we can see that African Americans are imprisoned 5.2 times more times than whites, and 4.7 times more likely to be represented in court by a public defender.
As we can see in a San Diego State University report in 2016 entitled "The Intersectionality Perspective in Mass Incarceration," they named the social construction of race, social class, and gender as simultaneous forms of oppression on people that are adapted into the mass incarceration. There is also a report by Geneva Brown in 2010 that I felt really aligned with me, which is why I wanted to integrate this concept, was the intersectionality of race, gender, and reentry, challenges for African American women. Geneva Brown spoke a lot about the African American women experience within the prison system, and I really felt that this could be me. African American women face reentry challenges and reintegration worse than many other populations, as they have other titles, prior titles, as mothers, heads of households, and caregivers. I personally have been a caregiver for my grandpa and my grandmother. As an African American woman, I understand that this can have a toll on people, especially people that have criminal record on them and that can be used against them as oppression. The reason why we chose intersectionality as the concept is because all three of us here have various intersectional identities that affect us every day, especially as students. That is why we wanted to call intersectionality to your attention.
In conclusion, public defenders mostly represent people of color, especially people from Black and Hispanic communities. They are the same peoples that usually come from underfunded communities. In the purpose of improving our case, intersectionality refers to the ideas of discrimination and oppression. For public defenders to effectively represent their clients, public defenders must understand and address these intersections of oppression. This may involve advocating for resources and support services that address their clients' needs, such as mental health care and housing assistance. Ultimately, the work of public defenders is crucial in ensuring that all our individuals, regardless of their social, economic status, and native language, have the access to a fair and just legal
representation. By recognizing and addressing these intersectionalities of their clients' experiences, public defenders can help decrease the impact of systemic discrimination and oppression within the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We're ready. Is this on? Am I using the microphone?
Yeah, sure, go for it. Is it not on?
Oh, it died? Okay. Okay.
Cal Poly.
Okay, it's fine. Okay. Hello, my name's Annette from the University of La Verne, and I will be synthesizing Cal Poly SLO stakeholder of siblings with ours of parents and children. My 3 points are, number 1, identifying what I chose and why. Number 2, how siblings play a role in family healing. And number 3, how siblings play a role in the mental health of the children of incarcerated parents. I'm going to start off with my first main point of identifying what I chose and why. So we, the University of La Verne, chose Cal Poly SLO stakeholder of siblings because in order to obtain better family relationships, we need all 3 to work together. So moving into my second point of parents of incarcerated and the siblings of the incarcerated. So siblings play a role in family healing for formerly incarcerated and incarcerated people because the family consists of the parents, the kids, and the sibling, and they're all working together to come to a better family relationship. So my partner Alexia talked about how incarcerated people's connection to the outside world is very important for them being reintegrated into society and to lessen the chance of them of reviticism. Something that my partner also points out is the Friends Outside organization, which is a program where there is family therapy for the family, and siblings should be an important part of this family therapy because these formerly incarcerated people and incarcerated people need to adjust back into society once they are released, and this creates a stronger family connection, and it allows for the formerly incarcerated people to be productive members of society and to feel like they have a backbone and someone to rely on when they need help adjusting back into society. And this also stops the cycle of family members, for example, the parents and the children, the cycle of these kids also being incarcerated because of their parents. So these siblings play an important role in this and family healing overall. Moving into my third point, which is the children and siblings of incarcerated people. So siblings play an important role in kids' mental health after the parent has been incarcerated. So my partner Kael brings up this research from the Society of Research in Child Development, where he states that ADHD, depression, and other mental health problems heighten when a parent has been incarcerated. So the siblings of these incarcerated people are important for for those children of incarcerated people, because these are the aunts, these are the uncles, these are the people who will be taking over for this child along with the parents of the incarcerated. They're going to be the role models that these kids are going to be looking up to. They might even be the guardian for these children. They're going to be the ones playing games with them. They're going to be the ones who are going to take them to school, the ones who are going to be there for that child. And this connects with the story of Gabriel, which is what Cal Poly SLO brought up, and how that kid lost the idol and their parent, lost that idol of the sibling. But instead, we can have this sibling of this incarcerated be that idol for that child, so that they don't feel alone and that they feel like there's someone there for them. It allows for that child to heal and grow up without feeling alone and have someone there for them. So we believe that children of the incarcerated, parents of the incarcerated, and the siblings of the incarcerated hold an important role in the discourse of the criminal justice system, and they need protection and deserve to be part of the conversation. And we believe that with siblings in conversation with parents and children, this creates a better outcome for all of our stakeholders overall. And thank you.
Is that we're good? Okay.
There's just a whole lot of stuff. I moved in.
Hello again.
Oh.
No worries. As previously mentioned, the family unit are the stakeholders that should be most heavily prioritized due to their economic, emotional, and personal connection to the incarcerated. We aim to prioritize the family unit by firstly increasing familial connections during the incarcerated sentence. Family therapy, increased visitation, and both independent and government programs are necessary to mitigate the harms resulting from isolation during their sentence. Siblings and parents are key members of the family, and each experience unique harms due to their unique relationships to the incarcerated. Siblings, for one, are deeply influenced by their other siblings, increasing their likelihood of becoming criminals themselves if they aren't supported. Another integral part of the family unit, the parents are another integral part of the family unit and experience the economic brunt of the criminal justice system. And this perpetuates systemic issues of poverty within the country. The family unit is at the core of this discussion, and they are the most directly affected by incarceration. And that is why we have expanded our scope to talk about children as our added stakeholder.
Our new stakeholder comes from the MSU Denver plan that was previously presented. So that means our third and final stakeholder will be children of incarcerated parents. The reasons why we're choosing to implement them as a part of our stakeholder case is, one, because of our harms. A few of the harms that we brought up with our own case, including adolescent delinquency, the increased risk of substance abuse and reoffending, also applies to these children of incarcerated parents, which means that the overall result of the trauma that they face and have endured forward, children have the same risk of reoffending, and if anything, they face a more direct result because it's coming from their parents, which means they, one, have to look for crime at a much younger age just to financially support themselves, and two, the increased risk of them reoffending is magnified, as brought up by their case earlier. So with this plan in mind, we propose a threefold plan. The first is implementing a federally mandated therapy and rehabilitation program in order to help mitigate the harmful effects that we mentioned. The second is maximizing them as a priority means more funding for therapy, but also it means more funding for programs that establish job opportunities for incarcerated individuals once released. A major aspect of our case was just talking about how once these people are incarcerated, they rely on their families for financial stability, and they allow them to have opportunities of employment opportunities once they're released. And so that being something that we prioritize, that also needs to be established in our solvency in order to mitigate the harms that these children, siblings, and their parents face. And furthermore, the impact of all of the impacts that we're going to look at, which help make our plan follow through, is the fact that our plan primarily focuses on pre-established families that are already in the status quo who are suffering. But when adding children as a stakeholder, we're prioritizing and finding a way to safeguard future families that have yet to be impacted by the criminal justice system. So with our plan today, what we solve is, first, we allow a means of therapy and rehabilitation for these families and children, which means that two, we increase the likelihood of positive post-release, meaning that they have job opportunities and they are much less likely to reoffend, and we reduce recidivism rates with this, keeping this in mind. So overall, what makes these three stakeholders vital of you prioritizing them in today's debate is because of the fact that, one, they influence generations to come. These are families that are already suffering that we're able to help, and two, the children of these incarcerated parents are our future. These children are going to be up here today or up here in your seats today. And so we need to be able to safeguard their futures as much as we can. And with providing them the means necessary to succeed in life, then we are able to accomplish that. Thank you.
Much louder than it needed to be.
All right. Hello again, y'all.
The mic died again.
Oh, projection then. Everybody ready?
Awesome. We've heard a lot of stories today. Stories like Anye's, who lost her father. Stories like Benjamin's, who lost his foreman. And stories like Gabriel's, who lost his brother. Today, we thought a point that was incredibly insightful and really helped to expand the point that we were wanting to talk about today was the point that the third Cal Poly team talked about, the idea of siblings. We think that the loss of a sibling is indeed a void in the structure of a community, one that absolutely must be addressed. It pairs perfectly with the idea of losing a parent and losing an employee. All three of those different structures are absolutely integral to a community and to securing the future of that community. When Gabriel lost his brother, it left a hole behind, a hole that he struggled to fill.
And to that point, it was incredibly insightful to hear how the importance of sibling relationships are increasing. What we see is that children are becoming increasingly more dependent on their siblings. Why? Because families are units. No man is an island. And just as parents are important to children, siblings that they grow up with and that they spend their days looking up to are equally as important. Now, I've learned a lot from my sisters, a lot of what I shouldn't do, and a lot that I should not do, but I still do anyway. And this is kind of the problem that we see existing with children that have sisters or brothers, siblings that experience being prosecuted and put into the criminal justice system. That increases the likelihood of them also committing crimes. And this is similar to when they have a parent that is incarcerated or processed in the criminal justice system. Again, what we see is when instability exists inside the family, it creates a void, and that causes long-term effects. And that void is also seen in economic communities. And really, what the importance of the criminal justice system is, or what we should prioritize, is making sure that these voids can be appropriately fulfilled so as to protect the sustainability and futures of communities. All three of these things tie together beautifully, and looking at exactly how structure can provide a sustainable future.
The stories of Anya, of Benjamin, and Gabriel aren't just stories. They are examples of a much bigger problem. Over 2 million people have been incarcerated, and these people have left a void behind. They are fathers, they are mothers, they are brothers, they are sisters, they are employees. But those mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, those employees aren't people that we typically talk about, and yet we should. Today, we're asked to discuss stakeholder groups that aren't typically included in the conversation, but are still victims of the incarceration system. They shouldn't be. They committed no crime. And so we would ask that the discussion is increased, that we discuss stories like that of Anya's, that of Benjamin's, that of Gabriel's, and we address these issues that haven't been addressed thus far.
All right, and that leads back to the penological goal of restoration. Again, by sustaining a future for children, for siblings, and for the general economy, what we're doing is providing not only a system that protects the community by removing individuals that are dangers to it, but protects the community by restoring the holes and the voids that are left. As Eden said in our first presentation, restoration is making something whole again. And while it may never be possible to have a completely perfect and functional system, there are definitely reforms and there are definitely prioritizations that can make that more feasible, such as these prioritizations today. So we would ask that you look at these stakeholder groups as a unit and that you would look at the idea of restoration and sustaining a future. Thank you.
In our speech, we focused in on two main stakeholder groups, that being that of school boards and teachers and students. We focused in on them because together their cooperation can enact revolutions in the way that schools attain funding, but also provide the programs necessary to assist at-risk students. We want to now focus in on another team, that being the Cal Poly team of Rachel and Sophia, and specifically their initiative of after-school programs. Because we must concede, the statistics are not negligible. Them proving that $1 invested in after-school programs is $9 in economic growth, as well as the case studies they had on mentorships, were truly impactful. But we want to work with them, advocate alongside them, and show that there is a means by which we can attain this. We not only outline the programs that we can do, such as restorative justice and diversion programs, but we want to take that of after-school programs and provide a roadmap through which we can actually obtain the funding to instill this among schools across the United States.
We agree that focusing on the education of children is vital. We believe entirely that through policy decisions we came up with, which are using local property taxes in a more equitable way and rezoning district lines to encompass both wealthy and poor communities, then some of this funding could be used to fund after-school programs that also further follow these equitable principles. We believe that the expansiveness of our policy propositions and the fact that we are building a platform that will foster compassion between school boards and teachers and students will allow for not only better after-school programs, but a better environment and community overall with socioeconomically diverse sports, friend groups, and neighborhoods, and fewer incarcerated individuals. We are striking at the root of the problem. We would agree that after-school programs are important, but note that it is even more expansive than that. With our stakeholder groups of school boards and teachers and students, especially those in low-income communities, we will naturally foster a platform and format in which school boards, teachers, students will be able to collaborate on new ideas of ensuring all students, but especially low-income students and students with incarcerated parents, will have the opportunity to succeed and avoid the criminal justice system, even if their lives outside of school are difficult. School is meant to be a place for self-betterment, both socially and intellectually, and we firmly believe that our proposed plan will better establish these principles. A review of state studies found that rearrest rates for youth within 1 year of release average 55%, while reincarceration and reconfinement rates average 24%. By ensuring mental health is fortified in all schools through equitable resource distribution, we will not just be keeping students out of prison while they are in school, we will not just be keeping graduates out of prison once they graduate from school, but we will also be keeping youth from being trapped in the criminal justice system.
Education is extremely important. Having a quality education is a core aspect of instilling the values of virtue, compassion, integrity, and all the others that we have discussed through the Holistic Justice Challenge. Having access to a quality education allows children to transcend the boundaries that they were born with. Having access to a holistic education system allows children to overcome poverty, a broken home, or even blindness. We believe that including the after-school programs in conjunction with the support of school boards and teachers and students will create a holistic justice system. We believe that while every aspect of a holistic justice system, addressing students while they're in prison, after, with respect to job is important, but at the end of the day, we believe that the best way to create a just society is to raise a just generation.
Thank you.
This concludes the student presentation portion of our program today. I'm going to take the judges with me to a deliberation room.
You know, I actually tried to role play, at least in my judgeship, of if you were presenting this to me when I had actual responsibilities to address it. And, you know, I'm so encouraged by, you know, the disadvantaged stakeholders that you identified, and you were absolutely on target. You know, the family and the incarcerated, when I would, I don't know how, so when I would testify, I would try to remind the legislatures that, you know, in corrections, we had 3 stakeholders. Society was a stakeholder for our department. The incarcerated population was a stakeholder for what we did. And then victims were a stakeholder, but I would divide it up. I'd divide victims up between the victims of crime, absolutely a stakeholder. Victims among us were those that both in the incarcerated population and the staff that had been victims themselves. The number of incarcerated persons that have been victims themselves, depending on the different categories of crime, is very high, but it's also in the staff. And any organization has to have great recognition of it. But then I use the term the forgotten victims, and that's the family of the incarcerated. So I'm so appreciative that you didn't forget that. And I say that sincerely as we looked at this. I'll give you some of our thought processes, but you know, I'm not going to hold out, just so you know who wins. As you know, who wins? The team that got their idea incorporated into the winning team is in second place. So we chose first place, the team from Patrick Henry, Eden, and Hannah. So, and that means, yes, Cal Poly, I gave you 3 because you went last. Neely and Matthew gets second place because they were incorporated. Okay, so in presentation, and again, we discussed in and fellow judges will jump in, but they wanted me up here because I'm the one who leaves the state tomorrow and has the best chance, of not having physical repercussions for having to make this very difficult decision. And it was a very difficult decision. I would argue that if this was a point system, very few points would have divided kind of at the top end the Patrick Henry team in both Cal Poly 1 team, Rachel and Sophie, and the Cal Poly 3 team that we've already mentioned. When we looked at the presentation from Patrick Henry, first your presentations, where did you go? My eyes are, there you are. So you presented yourself very well. You presented yourself well in dress. You presented yourself well in your stance, in your presence. When you're trying to persuade people, that's important in how you do that in words of choice. The only criticism I would give you is, the response is yes, not yeah. But it's an age thing. People my age, are hung up on things like that. So no, but it was excellent. We really liked the way you did storytelling and then brought in the factual basis behind it. And several groups did that very well. There's a certain persuasive, I don't know, you listen to the State of the Union speeches of the last 10 to 15 years, and you notice how every president does it. They tell stories, and then that person ends up, oh, look, they're in the gallery right there. It's something that is easily remembered, but it's only effective if you put evidence behind it. So yeah, start with the anecdote, something easy to remember. And in my case, I actually remembered longer than 5 minutes the name Anya. It was just effective to say, this is a story of the bigger problem we're trying to tell. And so that was an effective approach. And then bringing in the evidence, be it from the Vera Institute or from others as it played out. When it came time to incorporate from the other team, what again really impressed us was it wasn't like just an add-on. You made it part of your holistic presentation. And when you did your conclusion, you added some wonderful imagery to it. For example, when you reframed our earlier discussion on restoration, you came back and says, that's making something whole again. And that was a very effective way to conclude your presentation of this is really what we're trying to accomplish. Now I can go team by team by team. We'll do that if you want, and give you. I'm sorry. Do you still do this topic after you leave this presentation? This is it.
Maybe it stays. I don't know. We got to talk with John, and I got to talk.
Yeah, because I'll tell you. It was so hard for me to sit there and not want to jump in and tell you that. So Wayne Wright was a former Secretary of Corrections of Florida. Sorry, that probably wasn't a fair question to ask. Though, those are questions you'll get. and he passed away 2 years ago, but I met him. He was a lovely man, and the reason his name's in it is if you're the secretary, your name gets to go on the suit. So the plaintiff is the other guy. But yes, my name has been on different suits. Not fair. But anyways, yeah, I almost went into the textbooks. We actually won the case. And I went, seriously, we won? Whew. Otherwise, I would have been Harvard versus Inch. You would have read about it, in the future. But it is, there's certainly things that I'd say very positive, with each of the teams as you worked to bring your two stakeholder communities and bring it forward. But I guess just to generalize, if you want, I'd be happy to talk to people after, and I'm going to pass it to my judge mates here. Always in your presentation, state first, this is exactly what I'm going to tell you. tell them, and you can do that through the storytelling method, followed by evidence method and all that, and then end up, this is what I just told you. It sounds almost so, I hope that's what you teach. It sounds almost so simplified to be moronic, but especially as you start presenting and you find yourself in situations, for example, if you're working as a staff in the legislature and all of a sudden you're getting that chance to present to your representative or to the head of a school board and all that, the higher the person is in the organization, the more they have institutional ADHD. If I said that right? Because when I used to brief, when I was younger, brief one-star generals, I could talk to them for an hour and we'd really get into the subject. Then I had to brief 2-star generals and you had 10 minutes. 3-star generals, it was the 2-minute elevator speech. That's all you got. 1-star general, if you didn't capture them in 30 seconds and get the point across, they're off to the next thing because they're thinking about the whole world and the entire army. Well, translate that into civilian business, into government. You have got to know the person you're briefing and how much time that person has to focus on what you are trying to persuade them to do, to make a good decision, and then to give that good information to make that good decision. And one of the things you want to do is have no distractors. So dress can be a distractor. Use of language can be a distractor. Running down a rabbit trail because it's really interesting and you really want to show what you know about it can be a distractor, unless that leader wants to run down that same rabbit hole with you. Just being clear, concise, hitting it hard, very organized. And that meant a lot to us too. Several of the teams that, you just did very good organization and it was easy to follow. I could almost look at my notes and say, oh, that's exactly what they said. It was easy to follow. But I commend you, I really do. And I commend you not only for your performance, I commend you for your choice to participate in a really important topic. And I encourage you to keep involved in it, even if you're going to go work for a hedge fund, continue to stay involved because community, sorry to bust you out like that. Community, your community, and you've got to be involved in our criminal justice system, because those of us that do it, we do need you. All right, that's. You guys want to? Thanks. Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Yeah, I won't take too much more time other than say that for all of you that participated, I was truly impressed by just the presentations and the arguments. Okay, I have a former student here. He knows I don't need this. From everyone. So how I looked at it, I am trained professionally. I've been in the business for a long time in community corrections, which I'll say is a difference between corrections as a probation officer, but I've also been trained as a policy analyst. So I really sort of looked at it, your presentations from that perspective. And I thought Patrick Henry, Cal Poly 3, I think it was, and then honorable mention really is Cal Poly 1. I just felt like these teams had the most complete, realistic solutions to, I think, what the problem statement was, looking at that. I saw that as being something that everybody on the political spectrum could get around, those stakeholders that are in the system, the stakeholders that we work with that are outside the system that could get around those type of ideas and solutions to that problem. So I think that's what really moved me and sort of my thinking about this. It didn't mean the other presentations were bad. You're just all very consistent. I appreciated your message. You kept coming back on message. And one of the things that I could appreciate what the general said is where I sit, most of my exec team don't have more than maybe 10, 15 minutes with me to state what the issue is, state how they plan to solve it, and then how they're going to next steps. So I'm thinking about other things. I have 4 or 5 things that I'm thinking about that we're trying to deal with at the local level. So so that's that's an excellent point, and hopefully you all remember that. I will encourage everybody here. I know not all of you may be considering going into public service, but I would encourage you to really think about it. If you want to change the system, you have to become involved in the system. That's the only way the system changes. As much as I appreciate those that sit on the outside and hold us accountable to making the system better, it doesn't change unless people are willing to step into that world and be part of it and be part of the solution making. Because see, the thing about it is that those that are in the system, no matter what system it is, today was the criminal justice system, but often we are the linchpin to try to really inform not only the public, but the decision makers on what is the best approach. So without that, those not willing to do that, it's hard to change systems altogether. So I would really encourage you to do that. Because for myself and my colleague here from the county, Dr. Star Graber, we understand our runways are much shorter now. We all see the end of the road, and the systems only get better if we have a future of workforce that wants to do jobs that we've sort of dedicated our lives to do. So I would encourage you to really think about that. And again, I just thank you for it's been really a great way to spend my Saturday. I was very impressed by all of you and wish you all the best. So thank you.
Good. I guess I just want to echo that as well. I'm in total agreement. Patrick Henry, congratulations. Cal Poly 3, Cal Poly 2, 1. You guys did a great job. Everybody did, really. And appreciate all of the interest in this topic. Many of you knew, for example, about ACEs and how important behavioral health is in the criminal justice system, how substance use affects families and those victims and people in the system. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, and good luck to all of you. Thank you.
All right, the goal now, y'all, is to get the judges and the competitors and the coaches to go stand out by that horse statue so that we can take a picture. So if folks could start, it's just right out here. You can see the horse statue. Let's all gather at the horse statue.
Truly, I will do that for you. I will give you. I will give you my one because, like I said, this is my last day here. They will cut me off.